This happened to me more than 15 years ago now, but I still remember it vividly. It's not just the event itself, it's the way that it made me feel. The weight that I can still recall on my chest, and the absolute certainty that I wasn't alone. Then add in the gut punch the next morning when everything became terrifyingly real. It was late December in a small town in Texas. We don't get snow all that often, but that day had dumped about 5 inches across our yard. Everything was blanketed in white, and by the time the sun went down, the whole neighborhood was completely quiet, almost like the snow had muffled all the noise that would otherwise come from it. I can't recall the exact time, only that it was fully dark out. I was a kid, maybe 9, 10 at the most, playing in my room like usual, but my room was a little bit different than any of my friends'. It wasn't just a bedroom. It was actually 2 rooms connected together. A front mudroom with a door that led straight outside, and then my actual bedroom behind it. The outside door was an old wooden one, solid and heavy with original hardware and a single window on the top half. The window had a shade, but let's be honest, those thin old window shades don't do much. Anyone standing outside could easily peer in if they really wanted to. My parents' room was at the very back of the house, so I was up front by myself. That wasn't odd. It was actually pretty normal. I'd be in my room messing around with my Hot Wheels or some toys, and they'd be off doing their own thing. That night, I think they were taking a shower together in their bathroom, way on the other side of the house. I was sitting on the floor in the mudroom, organizing a bunch of cars into racing teams or something like that, all when I got this strange feeling. You know that prickly sensation that crawls up the back of your neck? Like your body knows something's wrong before your brain does? I paused and looked up at the door. More specifically, I looked at the little gaps at the edges of the window shade, looking for anything out of the norm. I couldn't see anything though, just darkness. But I kept staring, trying to make out a shape or movement, anything that could possibly explain the unease. After a minute or two, I convinced myself it was nothing and went back to my playing. Well, maybe 5 minutes later, that same feeling swept over me again, only this time much, much stronger. Only instead of checking the door again, I turned my back to it. I remember telling myself, "You're just being a scaredy cat. It's in your head." I didn't want to look. I just wanted the feeling to go away. And that's when I heard it. The soft, metallic sound of the doorknob being touched, almost like someone had just laid their hand on it. I froze, completely. My back was still to the door, but I didn't need to see anything to know exactly what was happening. I held my breath, listening, and sure enough, the knob started to move. It was slow and deliberate at first. Someone was seemingly testing it, twisting it just a bit to see if it was locked. And I still couldn't move. I don't mean I was too scared to move. I mean my body literally wouldn't let me. My limbs felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. My chest tightened so badly that it felt like someone had parked a car on it. I just sat there, back to the door, utterly paralyzed. All the lights were off in the house except for mine. From outside, you could clearly see that the only room lit up was the one I was in, and whoever was on the other side of that door knew it. Then the knob turned harder, not gently this time, way more force, like someone had figured out the lock might be weak. I should explain now. This door didn't have a modern lock. It was one of those that required a skeleton key, meaning the knob itself could turn freely unless you locked the separate deadbolts. Thankfully, we had 2 installed, one at the top, one at the bottom. But whoever was outside, they didn't know that. The moment the knob turned all the way, I bolted up and backed against the wall, about 5 feet away from the door. I didn't even remember standing. I just found myself there, glued against the wall, staring at the door in complete silence now. Then it happened again. The knob began to turn, slowly, like they were now testing to see if it would open. when the knob made it 360 degrees and the door didn't budge. That's when whoever it was started pushing against it. The door shook a little, softly at first, but then came the pounding. Someone kicked the door. Once, twice, a third time. Each kick rattled the door frame. It was like the sound finally broke whatever spell I was under. I screamed as loud as I possibly could and sprinted to the back of the house, yelling for my parents. They were still in the bathroom when I reached them, soaking wet and confused. I remember yelling something like, "Someone's trying to get in." They both ran up to the front with me, but they didn't even bother to look outside. They checked the door, wiggled the knob, then looked around inside the mudroom. "It's probably just an animal," my dad said. "Or maybe the wind." "Dad, someone was just kicking it," I remember insisting. "They were trying to get in." But neither of my parents were having it. Old house, creaky door, kid with an overactive imagination. That was their verdict. They told me to calm down and to go get into bed. No one even looked out the window. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed for hours, staring at that doorknob. I remember the way the light from the street lamps made it shimmer slightly in the dark. Every little creak or actual gust of wind outside made me jump. I felt like if I looked away even for a second, something would rush in. Eventually, though, I must have passed out from the exhaustion because the next thing I remember, I was being shaken awake. This time, my parents weren't skeptical. They were the rattled ones. My mom was sitting on the edge of my bed, gripping my shoulders and asking, in a very serious tone, why did I think someone tried to break in? I told them everything that I had told them the night before again, step by step. Only this time, they chose to listen. Once I finished, they took me by the hand and walked me to the front door. My dad didn't say a word. He just pointed at the snow-covered yard. At that point, it was clear as day to see. You could see where someone had walked along the street, cut through our yard, and gone straight to the window of my mudroom. From there, those footprints led directly to the door, the very spot where I'd been playing the night before. There were no prints going elsewhere, no sign that whoever this was had circled the house or knocked on other doors. This person came straight to my door, tried to get in, and then vanished back the way they came. The police showed up later that morning and took a report. They asked all the questions you'd expect, took pictures of the prints, but in the end, nothing came of it. No suspects, no further incidents. Whoever this was walked up to our house, then vanished off into the night, and never came back. And while that held true, I never felt safe in that house again. Even now as an adult, I think back to how helpless I felt. Not just because someone was literally trying to force their way into my room, but because my parents didn't believe me. I was a kid, trying to scream that something was wrong, and all I got was a pat on the head and told to go to sleep. If those deadbolts hadn't been there, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. I've lived in many other places since then. I've locked hundreds of doors in my life, but to this day, every time I hear a doorknob rattle, or even a creak that sounds like one, my heart instantly skips a beat. Because for one night, there was a stranger standing just inches away from me, separated by nothing but an old wooden door and a couple of metal locks. That's the feeling that I'll never forget. I was actually just looking for a story that I posted a while back, but I think I may have deleted it on accident. By far, this has been one of the scariest moments of my life, and in light of recent events going on, I think that's what caused it to resurface. I lived a pretty sheltered life as a kid. I'm an only child, and as is sometimes the case with only children, I lived an extremely overprotected life. My mom drilled stranger danger in my head since preschool and would always stress the importance of being safe. Never go into a bathroom by yourself. Never get into a stranger's car. Never drink from an open bottle. always stay within an adult's eyesight. I have to admit that half the time it went in one ear and out the other. As a preteen, I thought I knew it all and just hated the constant nagging. However, I get where she was coming from now. My mom was a recent widow and was adjusting to the role of both mom and dad, trying her best to shield me from the horrors that I'm only now beginning to see. We lived in an area that used to be a quaint little dairy town, but over the years had gone downhill and became crime-ridden. The dairy farm fell out of business, and in its place, they constructed new homes. It wasn't a bad place to live, but it wasn't the best either. I grew up thinking it was a common occurrence to hear helicopters fly by, announcing that they were looking for someone. The cross street from my house led to a park that was known for gang activity where almost every weekend, someone would either be found dead or beat up. But it was okay because we didn't live on that end of the street. We knew most of the neighbors, and if we didn't know them by name, at least knew what they looked like. Despite it not being the best neighborhood, it was pretty quiet, and we felt safe. By the time I was in 7th grade, I finally had gotten some freedoms. My best friend Tiffany and I would take turns spending the night at each other's houses, but most of the time she would come to mine. Tiffany had a little brother that would always pester us, and she liked coming over to my house because we could talk about boys without her little brother trying to eavesdrop. I think my mom preferred it that way too, because in her head, we were just more safe at our house. She would even sometimes go on her daily walks and leave us home by ourselves for about an hour or so, which we absolutely loved. I'm not sure what we happened to do on this particular day. We probably ate pizza, sat on my front porch outside as the sun set, and listened to the radio at way too high of a volume. Perhaps this was even one of those nights my mom left us home alone for a while. I wish I could say I saw something out of the ordinary or felt uneasy, but I didn't. After it got dark that night, we retreated to my room. My room has 2 windows, one that faces the backyard and the other that faces the street. I like natural light as much as possible, so as usual, the blinds were still open from the day. Even though it was now dark outside, which meant people could see in but we couldn't see out, I still left them open. I think I was too lazy to climb onto my bed to close them, and had this false sense of security knowing that there was a tall pine tree directly in front of my window. With the tree in front of it, I felt protected, almost as if my room was invisible to the outside world. As the night grew quieter, we decided to build a fort out of sheets and tell each other scary stories. By this time, it was really late, and my mom was fast asleep in her room. After the first story or two, I started to grow uneasy and got up to close the blinds. I was creeped out thinking someone could be lurking outside peeking in, but figured it was all in my head because of the stories we were talking about. We got through a couple more classic stories. Think The Hook Killer or La Llorona. And that's when we started talking about true ghost stories, things that relatives claimed they had seen or heard. Our eyes were watery, hearts pounding, muscles clenched when suddenly there was a loud, furious banging on my bedroom window. It wasn't a knock that grew into a series of louder knocks. It was an angry knock from the onset, one that you felt throughout your entire body. My heart was pounding in sync with each subsequent knock. I sat there still, not knowing what to do, my mind frantically trying to make sense of the situation. It just didn't make sense that someone would be knocking on my bedroom window so late at night. We have an iron gate that surrounds our house, and it's pretty loud when you open it. I was surprised that we didn't hear the gate open at all. Even then, the front door is 5 feet from the gate. Why didn't they knock at the door first? My room is all the way in the back and wasn't even the first window with a light on. You would have passed by 2 others before you got to mine. A million questions running through my head, and my brain comes to the only possible conclusion. This is Tiffany's little brother trying to scare us. Yeah, because that really makes sense. A 10-year-old boy walked over to my house in the middle of the night just to scare us. In what felt like ages but was likely only a matter of seconds, I came to the realization that there was no way it could be her little brother. The knocks only continued. They were loud and angry, yet no one was saying a thing. Both Tiffany and I were frozen in fear. I just wanted to stay hidden in the fort, where I knew we couldn't be seen. What if whoever was knocking was peeking in through the cracks in the blinds and watched me as I crawled out from under the sheets? The thought of that made every muscle in my body weak. Then, silence. The knocking just stopped. I felt my body ease up a bit. Maybe whoever was out there had left. And right on time, cue a preteen brain. We decided to go investigate. My mom was blissfully unaware of what was going on, still fast asleep in her room, and we weren't going to bother her. We slid out of the fort and tiptoed down the hallway towards the front door. Adrenaline pumped through our body as we decided one of us would sneak to the front door and look out the peephole or window and see if we could see something, anything. Neither of us wanted to be the one to do it though, but it was my house, so I volunteered. All the doors were locked. Our windows have bars on them. I just had to be as quiet as possible. Beneath every step I took, the wood creaked and groaned. After a few minutes, I finally found myself standing at the front door. My whole torso felt numb. As I inched my face closer to the peephole, holding my breath, I look out, and I suddenly felt both hot and cold at the same time. I didn't know whether to keep looking out or to slink back down. I think a little part of me had convinced myself that the porch would be empty that night. But instead, standing on my porch, I saw an unfamiliar man. I have no idea who this guy was, but he was standing awkwardly close to the door. With everything else that had happened leading me up to this moment, it didn't feel right. What threw me off the most was that he was just pounding on my bedroom window 15 or so minutes ago, and now he was standing at the front door so calmly and quietly. It was as if the roaring avalanche had turned into a falling feather. With my stomach in my throat, I snuck back to the hallway where Tiffany was waiting for me. All I could say was, "There's a man out there." Immediately, she says, "Do you think we should tell your mom?" Although it had a question mark at the end, it wasn't a question. It was much closer to a demand. We ran into her room and urgently told her, "Mom, someone's knocking." She must have sensed the urgency in my voice because she sprung right up and told us to stay in her room with the door closed and instructed us not to open the door no matter what happened. We stood behind the door for what seemed like ages, just trying to listen. The front door was too far away, so all we heard was silence. Finally, we heard footsteps coming back towards us. It was so quiet around us that I could hear my own heartbeat pound in my ears. I about had a heart attack when my mom's bedroom door swung open. It was my mom. She told us not to worry about it, that the man that was on our front doorstep was now gone. This left me with a million questions, but she was vague answering them all. What did he want? Nothing. Who was he? I don't know. She shooed us back to bed, and we complied. The adrenaline had started to wear off, and I was now exhausted. We didn't stay up and speculate or talk. That was that, and it was the end of the story. For now. The next day, I was sitting in my room, and I heard my mom talking to someone. I've always been a very quiet kid. Even as a baby, people would often forget I was around. I may be quiet, but that's so I can hear everything. I stopped what I was doing, probably downloading music on Napster or something, and listened up. My mom was telling her friend about the man. Apparently, she opened the door and through the screen asked the man if he needed help. The man stammered as if trying to think up a story, and he introduced himself as our neighbor. He said that his mom was sick and he was going around asking for money to help buy her medicine. Concerned but also trying to poke holes at his story, my mom asked him what her name was, just in case my mom knew her. The guy didn't offer an answer, or he gave a vague one, and then pointed in a general direction saying they lived at that house over there. My mom didn't buy it though. She knew everyone that lived near us, and she had never seen this man before. She probably should have just closed the door at this point and told him she didn't have any money on her. but she didn't want to piss him off. She didn't know if he was armed or dangerous and thought, maybe he's just a junkie and will run off if I give him some cash. Luckily, she had fallen asleep in her clothes, so as she reached in her back pocket, she found a $5 bill, change from the pizza we had ordered earlier. She didn't open the screen door to give him the cash, though. Rather, she slid it through the gap at the bottom of the door. But at this point, the man started getting more aggressive and growls, "That's all you have?" Now my mom is starting to sense something more sinister in this man. He's not just a junkie, or if he is, he's an aggressive one. My mom then lies to him and quickly tells him, "Yeah, that's all I have. We live day to day here, and $5 is actually even more than I should spare, but your mom's sick, and I feel bad." Not satisfied by her answer, he continues to demand more cash. My mom realizes that this man is not taking no for an answer and begins to bluff. "I don't have any more cash, but maybe my husband has some on him. I would hate to leave a neighbor in need. Your mom must really need that medicine. Tim." The moment my mom feigns a call to my dad, who hasn't lived with us in years, this man's demeanor changes as he mutters, "No, that's okay," and treks out of there. I don't know what would have happened if the man had called her on her bluff, but thinking a man was present clearly scared the hell out of the guy, at least enough to drive him away, and fast. Hearing all of this sent a chill through me, thinking that he probably thought me and Tiffany were home alone. He must have been watching us and was planning on breaking in. Again, cue preteen brain. Oh well, he's gone now. I better go download that Usher album. We never saw that man again. Clearly, he wasn't a neighbor of ours, and he definitely wasn't trying to fundraise for a sick mother. Glad my mom was savvy enough to get him off of our porch. Glad that we were smart enough to wake her up when we did. I have no clue what that man actually wanted, but it most likely wasn't to compliment us on our fort architecture skills. We recently had a pool installed in our backyard, something we'd been saving up for and looking forward to for a long time. It was our way of turning the space into something fun and relaxing, especially now that our kids are out of the house and we have more time to enjoy the quiet. But with construction came its fair share of chaos. One thing that got totally wrecked during the dig was our landscape lighting. The crew had to cut through wiring to make room for the pool, and while the final product looks great, it left our yard pitch black at night until we could get the lighting redone. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but we've got 3 dogs. Every night, they head out to the yard for their final bathroom break before bed. It's usually me who takes them out, bundled up in a coat, standing on the patio waiting for them to do their thing. There's our older girl, a sweet rescue who's a mix between a lab and a corgi, stocky and protective with a surprisingly deep bark. Then there are our 2 pugs, short and snorty, and definitely not brave enough to wander too far from the porch. So one night, about a month ago, the usual routine was playing out. It was a cold and overcast night, one that has no moonlight, just a heavy blackness hanging over everything. Our backyard is long and narrow, with old trees lining the back fence. We have a gate set up around the pool that deters the pups, so we didn't have to worry about the dogs getting in trouble there. I stepped out onto the patio, pulling on my boots while the dogs darted ahead of me into the yard. The pugs always meander out a few feet, then wait to be escorted the rest of the way. But our rescue girl? She took off like she was on a mission. Not the usual sniff and wander. She was bolting full speed and barking like she meant it. At first, I thought she might be honed in on a skunk or a raccoon. We live close enough to the woods that it wouldn't be surprising. But then I noticed how the pugs had frozen a few feet away, barking nervously but not daring to follow her. That's when I started to feel the knot in my stomach. I called her name, once, twice, but she just kept going. The barking turned more aggressive, louder even. And then, just like that, it stopped. What followed was an absolutely horrible yelp, high-pitched and obviously pained, followed then by silence. My heart dropped. I scooped up the pugs, now squirming in my arms, and ran awkwardly through the dark, calling for her again and again. When I finally saw her, she was lying on her side near the back tree line, completely still. Just as I reached her, the neighbor's motion sensor light flicked on, casting a strange yellow glow over the fence and giving me my first clear look. My pup wasn't bleeding. There were no bite marks and no obvious wounds. She tried her best to get up, but she clearly struggled at first. After a few more moments of effort, she was able to push herself upright and started limping back towards the house. She was a step slower than normal, but it's clear that she was beelining to the back door like she knew she needed to get inside. I coaxed her along as we moved, whispering encouragements while glancing nervously over my own shoulder. That motion light had gone off at a very convenient time, and I couldn't shake the thought of what might have triggered it. Once we got back inside, I yelled for my husband and explained everything. We checked her over top to bottom and found nothing. No cuts, no blood, not even sore paws. Whatever had happened out there, it had left no obvious mark. After some considerable thought on the matter, we eventually settled on the theory that it wasn't an animal out there. There had been a person in our yard, likely hiding near the back trees. When the dogs ran out, they startled whoever it was, and our girl likely got too close. Whoever it was must have kicked her hard to get her away, and then scrambled over the fence themselves. Well, the next morning, still rattled, we decided to check out the yard a bit more thoroughly. I didn't expect to find anything. It's rare to get any real answers in moments like these. But there were boot prints. Not ours. Large, deep ones in the soft soil near the back tree line. And then again closer to the fence. While checking out the second set of prints, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. There was a crushed cigarette butt tucked behind one of our landscaping rocks. Now, neither myself nor my husband smoke. None of our friends do either. And the position of it made it clear that someone had been hanging out there. I'm not sure for how long, but at least long enough to kill an entire cig. What unnerved me the most wasn't that someone had been in our yard. It was the not knowing why. There's nothing back there worth stealing. We don't keep anything valuable outside, so what were they doing? Watching us? Scoping out the house? That night shook me in a way that I didn't expect. Our brave girl thankfully bounced back quickly. No internal injuries, and she's back to her usual self. But I'm not. That feeling of being watched, of someone hiding just outside the edge of your vision, that stuff stays with you. We had the landscape lights fixed within a few days, and even added motion sensors of our own. But that same unease, it still lingers. Maybe it was a homeless person, or for whatever reason, a neighborhood teen cutting through our yard. Maybe it actually was someone casing the place. I don't know if I'll ever really know. These days, I pause just a little bit longer before heading to bed at night. I flick the porch light on, even when I don't need to. I find myself checking locks more than once, always looking for something that just doesn't feel right. I used to feel comfortable in my own yard. It was just a place the dogs ran through, where our kids used to play, where we'd sit in the summer and watch the sun dip below the trees. But now, everything feels different, like a line's been crossed. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted, but I know what it felt like when my dog ran straight towards something she couldn't see and ended up hurt because of it. I know now just how fast that feeling of safety can vanish. When I was 18, I was living in a small town. Not much going on there, but enough that you could find your usual cast of characters if you looked in the right or wrong places. I hung around with this loose group of ratty skaters, kind of kids who knew everyone, and through them, I got connected with this cat named Max. Max was 29 at the time. He was older than the group, definitely odd, but he sold weed, and he gave me good deals. That, combined with the fact that he lived nearby, made it all pretty convenient. I wasn't really driving yet, so it saved me the hassle of having to bum rides or take the bus to find my greenery. From the jump, Max gave off a weird vibe. Not necessarily threatening, just off. Like the kind of weird that makes you second-guess someone, even if they're smiling in your face. Still, I didn't mind weird. I actually liked people who were a little strange. Made things interesting. Our interactions were always short, 10 minutes tops. I'd stop by, make my purchase, maybe smoke a bowl if the vibe wasn't too strange, and then leave. He'd always offer to drop weed off at my house, but I would always say no. I didn't want this guy knowing where I lived. It felt like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I wasn't scared of him at that point, but I wasn't naive either. I knew there was something about him that made me feel weird, and I didn't want that anywhere near where I slept at night. Fast forward to May of 2018. Some of the same skater friends invited me to a bonfire. I didn't know Max would be there, but it wasn't a big deal. I wasn't going for him. I brought the guy I was dating at the time, said hellos to everyone, including Max, and we stayed and had a good time for a few hours. Some of the guys played guitar. People passed around beers. It was pretty mellow. But as we were getting ready to leave, probably no later than 11 p.m., I saw Max starting to unravel. He was angry about something, pacing and muttering to himself, and out of nowhere, he threw his guitar straight into the fire. He didn't just toss it in, he actually hurled that thing. Everyone just kind of froze, and I had no idea what triggered it. But I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I left with the guy that I came with, and I didn't give it another thought. That night I went to sleep like any other evening. But when I woke up the next morning, my phone had exploded. From 1 to 5 a.m., Max had sent me a continuous stream of texts. Paragraphs on paragraphs, filled with rants, accusations, declarations. It truly seemed like he had gone through an emotional meltdown, only captured in real time. He said things like, "You know how much I loved you," followed by, "You're a cruel cunt." Then he'd swing the other way. "I would give you the world if you'd let me," only to immediately say, "You really do deserve him though." The messages got darker, much more intense. "You're a predator and should be snuffed out. Just wait. You're stuck. I'll either love you or hate you to the fullest extent of my powers. Right now, I pray the worst death on you and that boy bitch." Then perhaps the most disturbing line of them all. "Losing you is like losing a mother to me." Mind you, Max had never once expressed any romantic interest in me. He never asked me out, never hinted at anything like that. We had strictly short, transactional interactions. I was barely 18 at this point, and this man was nearly 30. This all came out of nowhere, and I'd be lying if I said that it didn't scare the hell out of me. In one of his final texts that night, he told me that if I said I never loved him, he would leave me alone forever. So I texted him back that morning and I said, "I never loved you. Do not message me again." And just like that, he went silent. Or at least, that's how it seemed. The next night, Max posted pictures on Facebook of himself, naked, curled in a fetal position, his long hair now chopped off, calling himself a statue of shame. He was now spiraling publicly, and it was clear to everyone who saw it that something inside of him had snapped. But I never expected to be the one that he latched onto. About a week later, I got another message from Max late at night. He asked if I had seen the flowers he left along my sidewalk, said that he'd stolen every flower in the vicinity of my neighborhood that night, just to scatter them outside my home. I was immediately on edge. I texted back asking how he knew where I lived, but I also told him I hadn't seen any flowers, so he probably had the wrong house. I reminded him then that I never had feelings for him, and that this kind of behavior needed to stop. He said that he'd heard I lived on the same block as another skater guy in our group, which was true. That guy lived on the other side of the block, and I rarely even walked that way. So maybe he really did leave flowers, and I just hadn't seen them. This interaction caused me to block his number again. But a few weeks later, I woke up after a rough night, and that's when I found them. Flowers, scattered all around my property. Tons of them, lined the sidewalk, up the walkway, sitting like some kind of demented offering. This time, I was actually pissed. I still wasn't scared, just angry that he was still inserting himself into my life. So stupidly, I unblocked his number and texted him, "Why the f are there flowers outside of my house?" I still feel dumb about this because all it served to do was confirm to him that he'd gotten the right place this time. He replied with, "Sounds nice." I cursed him out, then blocked the number yet again. A week later, while I was out of town, my roommate sent me a photo. Someone had apparently drawn a heart with a peace sign inside of it, along with my name written beneath it in sidewalk chalk, right out in front of our house. That was the last straw. When I got back into town, I went straight to the courthouse to start the process of getting a stalking order. Then, still filled with unchecked emotion, I drove straight to Max's job. I walked in and told him he needed to stop harassing me, that this was stalking. He just stared at me, blank-faced, and said, "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." I snapped back, "Call the cops. I was just talking to them about you," before I stormed out. Not long after that, I picked up a used car, so I started driving again. One day, I passed him on the road. I hoped that he wouldn't, but he noticed me. The next morning, I woke up to find my car covered in flower petals. This was endless. I presented everything I had to the judge, including screenshots, photos, even his own statements. The stalking order was granted. He was served by police, and for the first time, I thought maybe this nightmare was over. But that wasn't the case at all. Even after the order, he kept at it. More chalk drawings, bizarre gifts left for me in front of the house, like a beheaded My Little Pony head glued on top of a beer bottle. I took everything to the police, but they told me unless I caught him in the act or got him on camera, there wasn't anything they could do. So I bought a security camera. Turns out, though, it was a piece of crap. I couldn't scrub through footage easily. I had to manually skip second by second, and it turned out to be pretty useless. I was now exhausted, afraid to even leave my house, closing curtains before dark, and I didn't exactly feel like a person anymore. I felt like prey. Eventually, out of desperation, I unblocked his number again. I figured if he texted me, he'd be violating the stalking order, and that would be enough. After a few days, it worked. He messaged me. It said, "Forgive me. We're charming. This is harming. Let us try again." I took that text to the authorities, and by September of 2018, he was finally arrested. He was facing up to a year in jail and had to stay locked up until our court date. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I could walk outside at night. I could go places without worrying that I was going to run into him. I felt like I was starting to get my life back. But that feeling of freedom, that didn't last. After just 3 months, someone posted his bail and he was released. We had more court dates ahead, and I hoped that they'd lock him up again. But his lawyer kept pushing the dates back, gathering evidence, supposedly. After about 6 months of delays, the state decided to close the case, said he wasn't a threat anymore. By this point, I had already moved, 3 hours away, new town, fresh start. For the most part, things have been peaceful. I feel safe, and it's been over a year since the case has been closed. But just last month, he started popping up again, messaging my friends on Instagram, people who live here in my new town, saying how fond he is of me. I've had him blocked for ages, but my profile on IG wasn't private, and I can only think that that's how he must have found them. It shook me, but I locked down my account, warned my friends, and promised myself something. I wasn't going to live in fear again. He doesn't know where I live. doesn't know where I work, and he never will. But the truth is, this whole experience has changed me forever. I'm now much more aware. I try to keep my guard up. I still close curtains earlier than I should. Not because I think he's coming, but because I know people like him exist. He stole a year of my life, and I'll always wish that he'd spent that year in jail instead of me spending it in fear. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, one where doors were left unlocked and you came home when the streetlights turned on at dusk. After moving away for college, I decided to move back to my quiet, sleepy hometown in one of the 2 apartment buildings there. I'm living there for roughly 3 months when one night, I go to sleep early on a Friday evening. Now, I'm a reasonably hard sleeper, so when I wake up in the middle of the night to noises, I'm usually alarmed. I'm going to describe my apartment layout for a better understanding. As you walk in the front door, the kitchen is to the left, living room to the right. There's a hallway straight ahead with 1 bedroom at the end. A bathroom is to the left in the hall, and my bedroom to the right. I get up from my bed, walk around the end of it, and peek my head out of the bedroom door. I look to the left to see my front door wide open to the outside hallway. There's a loud voice coming from my now lit up kitchen. From my vantage point, while I'm able to hear a voice, I'm unable to see into my kitchen. This made me freeze, a fact that I've left out of telling the story since. It's not something I'm very proud of, but I want to relay the story in its entirety. The freeze may have only been for a couple of heartbeats, but to me, it felt like much, much longer. I come to my senses after realizing that I've almost stopped breathing. I take a shallow breath to steady my mind and gather whatever bravery I have. There's no thought process about what to do at this point. I let my body and my instincts take over. I turn around and head back to the far side of my bed. I grab my phone from the nightstand and quietly remove it from the charger. Luckily, my bed frame is high enough for me to squeeze under it without much difficulty. The downside, though, I immediately realize that there's no escape from my hiding spot if things turn south. I'll have to rely on luck to get me through this. I dial 911 and a woman answers, asking about my emergency. I briefly explain in a whisper that an unknown man is in my apartment and that, as it stands, I'm currently safe. I lay there listening to the chaos unfolding in my home, reassured by the presence of my cat, Marcy, laying under the bed with me. It seems to me that whoever's in my kitchen is on a phone call based on the one-sided rambling. I tell the operator this fact and explain my fear that he's going to bring other people into my home. He was making enough sound to allow me to give a play-by-play on the call. He starts screaming about killing someone. I'm unsure at this point whether he's talking to the person on the phone or if he knows that I'm there. The voice I hear is unfamiliar, but this does little to ease my terror. He then starts ringing the doorbell in the outside hallway and yelling for me to come out. My blood runs absolutely cold as I realized that he might come to try to find me. Marcy is alarmed by the doorbell, and when she creeps out from under the bed, I panic. What if he hurts her? I start whispering as loudly as possible to get her attention without letting him know my location. She senses my unease and crawls back under the bed with me. At this point, I feel like I've been on the phone for an eternity, and I ask the operator how long until the police arrive. She's unsure, but assures me that they are on their way. My town is roughly a 30-minute drive to the nearest city police, but I assume there's a highway patrol that would be coming soon. Little did I know that safety was in no rush to get to me. I hear him walking around my apartment, and that's when he enters my extra bedroom, which I use as a storage room with a bed in it. He hasn't once stopped yelling. I'm still unaware whether he's on the phone or not. I hear him mention that it must be a kid's room. I shush the operator because he ceased his screaming for the moment. I hear more noises, like he's rifling through boxes and throwing things around the room. Then my fear is realized as I hear him quietly enter my room. I see his feet walk to my closet. He starts going through my clothes and emptying my hamper onto the floor. He turns around and walks to my bed before sitting down on it. I'm holding my breath now. I think he lays down at this point since the pressure of the bed lessens on top of me. This man is deathly silent, all while I'm doing all I can to not make a peep. There's shuffling and moving around, and he gets up and walks out of my room. I allow myself to take another shallow breath, and I steady my conviction. He starts making noise again, like he's throwing and punching things. I inform the operator that he was just in my bedroom, and the police need to hurry. I don't know how long I can keep Marcy under the bed, and I'm concerned about what could happen if he finds me. He walks back into the kids' room quietly. I shush the operator again because she's continually asking me for a play-by-play. I can hear him breathing from the other room. After the quietest few minutes of my life, he yells, "Who's there?" I freeze again, listening for any movement, but there's nothing. I'm starting to get lightheaded from all my shallow breathing. The silence in this place is deafening, and I fear that he's trying to detect me. After a lifetime, I hear footsteps entering my apartment. I hear a man's voice say, "Hey bud, you're in the wrong house." I've never felt more relief in my life before this night or since, once I realized that that was a cop. I hear my front door close, and I crawl out from under the bed before breaking down. The adrenaline and anxiety take over as soon as the feeling of safety washes over me. That's when a female officer comes around to my side of the bed and puts her hands on my shoulders. I'm trying my best to keep it together, but I'm failing miserably at this point. She let me put clothes on, and I could hear 3 male voices coming from my apartment. The woman left and came back with a handful of clothes asking if any weren't mine. They all were, and I told her so. She shut the door behind her as she left again. I turned and looked out my window, only to see no lights from the cop car on the street. I look at my phone and realize the call to 911 took 22 minutes. I can't explain the feelings I had at this time since so many hit me all at once. The door opened again and the officer motioned for me to exit. Taking a first look at my home was almost as anxiety-inducing as the event itself. My apartment was a complete mess. Clothes were everywhere, mixed with garbage and other belongings from my shelves and counters. The man had removed items that he had intended on taking and placed them outside in the hallway. They tell me they had found him on the floor in the second room completely naked, holding a bottle of lotion. In his vicinity, there was a winter hat with an unknown substance inside. The officer was kind enough to throw that in a garbage bag immediately. They tell me to look and see if any of the clothes in the apartment don't belong to me. I tell them no. This man had apparently entered my home completely naked and destroyed just about everything in sight. I noticed that the lid of my garbage can was filled with cat poop. It seems that it had been separated from the rest of the bag. The rest of the garbage was littering the outside hallway. They asked me if I'd like to stay at my place or go elsewhere. Thankfully, my parents lived nearby, and I had an officer drive me there. I explained to my parents what just happened, and in the next few days, I have to explain the situation to what felt like half the town. The ridiculousness of the story catches people's attention and becomes a slight joke even. I play along, attempting to be lighthearted, but I'm unable to dissociate from the horror I faced. Now, I should feel better knowing that he's in custody, but the events after the break-in do little to comfort me. An officer shows up with a subpoena to appear in court to testify, but I receive a call for postponement. I just want this whole thing to be behind me. After a month, I call the phone number on the paper I received and ask when they're rescheduling for since I hadn't heard anything. The woman informs me that they mailed another and I hadn't shown up. I asked where was it sent since I haven't received the summons. She tells me that they sent it to my address, but in the wrong town. I'm unable to comprehend how they couldn't know where I lived. The crime happened there. She tells me that the man pled guilty and was given 180 days as a sentence. I was furious. This man would get out of jail in 8 short weeks, including time served, for attempting to steal and entering my home. She reassured me that he also received another 180 days for a previous bench warrant he had. After his release, I kept track of his location using the sex offender registry. He had had relations with a child years prior. It makes his statements about the kids' room that much more unsettling. Soon after his release, he was arrested yet again, this time for a fourth DUI, and he was sentenced to 5 years with 2 of them suspended. I was happy for a while. My nightmares hadn't ended, but the tension I felt during my waking hours certainly lessened. It's been 2 years since this happened, and I've since moved 3 times. I don't know if I'll ever be content and happy anywhere, but I'm sincerely hoping that's not the case. He was released 6 months after his conviction for some reason or another on parole. He immediately disappeared and fled from his parole officer and the sex offender registry. I'm currently planning a cross-country move to try to rest my mind. I'm hoping to someday grow out of my nightmares. Although that's much easier said than done when you're faced with the memory that a naked and unstable criminal broke into your house while you were sleeping and spent 20 minutes looking for you, all while cradling a bottle of lotion. The story I'm about to tell you is one that has seriously and negatively affected me in my life. I'm not sure how this is going to come out, as I've never tried writing or telling this memory before. I'm nearly 37 now, and at the time that this took place, almost half a lifetime ago, I was 18. I'm also female if that matters. At the time, way back when, I was fascinated by sculpting and pottery. I was attending college in the next town along from mine, doing a beauty therapist course that I really ended up having zero interest in. After school every Tuesday, I had managed to find a pottery class in my town, so I would catch the bus from college, back to town, and go to pottery class before then walking home. I was attending this class for maybe 2 months before the guy who would change everything walked in. He arrived on his own and was extremely visibly shy and anxious. Cool, I thought. I myself suffered from anxiety, so I thought we had some common ground already. His name was Francis. Francis would never look you in the eye. He would look, sometimes quite wildly, from one point to another just above your head when he was talking to you. And when he was listening, he would stare directly at the floor. He was really intelligent though, eloquent too. And other than his little quirks, he was really interesting to talk to and had a lot of cool ideas about life. I liked him. He actually filled that classic archetype. Tall, dark, handsome. Long story short, when he told me he was 18 too, I was pretty happy, and we became really good friends really quickly. So we started hanging out other places beyond pottery class. I even went to his house a few times, met his parents and his sister. His sister was a lot younger than him, but I don't remember how old exactly. Maybe 4 or 5? His mom was Polish, but spoke excellent English. His dad reminded me of Carlisle Cullen, and the way he looked at me made me shiver. He had a weird deadness or coldness behind his eyes that would phase in and out, and it looked like pure hatred. By this point, Francis and I had become an item. His parents were delighted and immediately began discussing marriage, and that sort of thing creeped me out. It wasn't even jokey the way they discussed it, like parents might do to embarrass or tease you. They made it sound like I had already entered into some sort of contract. My first real red flag was how intense Francis became only the first 2 days after we became official. He would handwrite me poems, ranging from 3 to 6 A4 pages in length. In all honesty, it was some of the best poetry I'd ever read. My favorite being Die for Dreams, which actually turned out to be by E. E. Cummings, word for word. I thought he was just joking, or wanted to impress me, but couldn't write himself. So I ignored the compulsive lying regarding his poetry. Then the calls and texts started. I would silence my phone in school, and when I checked it at any point in the day, I would have an astonishing number of missed calls, sometimes over 100, no joke, and texts that were so long I couldn't even finish most of them. They were all ramblings of how his love for me surpassed his will to even live, and I was his heir, and reason that he would do anything for me. Mind you, this is days into the relationship. I should have been seriously put off, right? But I felt sorry for him. I did what you really shouldn't do, and I ignored my gut instinct. He was pretty isolated apart from his family and me. He had no other friends. I just thought he was attention-starved, and eventually he would level out. But this is when things started to spiral out of control. Shortly after a birthday of mine, Francis had settled down with the letters and texts slightly, but it still felt like I got calls every 15 minutes all day, and even intermittently throughout the night. Now, bearing in mind, we hadn't had sex, or even done anything more than a kiss. At the time, I had a big thing about not feeling ready to go further with him, and that I didn't ignore. But we had sexted playfully, and I had sent a couple of explicit pictures. Never do this, ladies. It never ends well. His mom found them. Well, no. To be specific, he showed her them, casually. She went bonkers. I checked my phone as I left school one day, and apart from the usual missed calls from Francis, I had 14 from his mother. Weird, I thought, and simply hit redial. She immediately informed me that she had spoken to a lawyer, and she was intent on ruining my life. I could almost hear her spitting as she screamed down the phone, calling me names and at one point threatening my entire family. I was stumped. This was a massive overreaction to a topless photo or two and some badly done text dirty talk. I was a little freaked out. This is when she said it and my stomach dropped. He's 13, you fucking pedophile. I'm going to ruin your life. This entire time up to this point, she had gone along with him being 18, picking out prospective universities, looking for potential housing around campus. But everything was a lie, and her son was 13. He looked, behaved, spoke, and generally checked out like someone my age, and I believed him, of course, because why would someone help their son to lie to someone about all of this? She had twisted a bunch of evidence together out of texts and the pictures, and a picture he had sent me during that day, she was going to go to the police with it. I was over 18 now, and where I live, I would get charged with having indecent images of children and sexual grooming, along with God knows what else. But they were clever about it, almost as if this were something they had planned all along. Because I had no evidence in email, text, or witness form of them saying he was above consenting age. And she flat out denied that she had ever said that. She said that she had always told me he was 13 and never agreed to this relationship. Soon after, my friends stopped talking to me. People started staring who knew me locally. I got hate mail, all because a rumor went around that I was a child abuser. I ceased any and all contact with Francis and his family, and they eventually had said they wouldn't go to the police, but only because they accidentally deleted the evidence. I was too scared to tell anyone. She was so descriptive about how she would ruin my entire life and reputation, and she would destroy my family's lives as well. I just hoped that it would all go away. I quit college. I couldn't go outside. I was getting death threats. But if I went to the police, I was scared they would think I really was an abuser. I had a mental breakdown, owing to the fact that Francis wouldn't stop calling, emailing, turning up, and threatening to kill me and set my house on fire if I didn't come back to him and marry him. He stole $2,000 off his dad using his card to order an engagement ring. He got another girlfriend, who was actually just a photo of a model from Thailand who was in her 20s, one who didn't even know Francis, all in order to try to make me jealous. He kept demanding that he was 19, 18, 19 again. He kept sending me videos of really horrific pornography that I didn't even think was legal. He threatened to unalive himself. He tried everything to get a reaction. He knew I wouldn't go to the police. He made it clear he would tell them I showed him private things he didn't understand. and hadn't really deleted the messages. I never replied to him though. For months, the stream of emails continued. I had blocked him on every media and phone I could, but I couldn't figure out how he kept finding my email addresses. Later in the year, and unrelated to me, I heard from a girl involved in an altercation with Francis. Apparently, he had held her at knife point after his parents left them to babysit his sister because she wouldn't be intimate with him. She managed to lock herself in the bathroom, and he hacked the door pretty badly with the kitchen knife. His parents got back but refused to believe the girl before he eventually stabbed his mom in the shoulder in a fit of wild rage. And then, and only then, were the police called and the girl allowed to leave. After this, he was diagnosed as autistic, and he never faced any punishment by the law. Personally, I've never met someone with autism who is anything like Francis, and I do know a lot of people on the autism spectrum. So I'm skeptical about this diagnosis, but I really don't know. As mentioned at the beginning of the post, I'm 37 now, and I haven't heard from him since he stabbed his mom years ago. And all that being said, I'm fine with never having contact with this man ever again. I grew up in a small town in the UK with my single mom and sister. Pretty normal childhood, all things considered. I didn't know much about my dad growing up, just what my mom had told me, which wasn't a lot beyond the fact that he wasn't someone that we wanted in our lives. I think I met him for the first time when I was about 10. Things are a bit hazy now, but I think he and my mom had started seeing each other again for a short time. It was rocky from the start. He'd show up, be around for a bit, then disappear once again. This kind of on and off thing kept happening until I was about 15. That's when he started getting aggressive with my mom, and she finally cut him off for good. At this point, I still didn't know the full story about him. Turns out, when she was pregnant with me, my dad used to beat her within an inch of her life, to the point where she said that it was a miracle that I was even born. She kept a lot of that from me for a long, long time. Well, one afternoon, not long after she stopped seeing him, he came to our front door. When my mom wouldn't let him in, he went ballistic. He tried to kick it in, yelling that he was going to burn the house down and kill all of us inside. I was home watching the whole thing unfold. I don't think I'll ever forget seeing him outside, making a throat-slitting gesture right at my window. The police ended up coming out that day and arresting him. Once he got hauled off, my mom filed for a restraining order. We didn't hear from him again after that, at least not for a while. About 3 years after he showed up at the house, I think that would have made it 2013, a postcard showed up. Just my name and a phone number on it. No message, but I knew immediately that it was from him. His handwriting was messy, and I recognized it right away. It had been years since we heard anything, and now, out of nowhere, he was trying to make contact again. I did what any sane person would do. I ignored it. Well, a few months later, in July of 2013, that's when the police showed up at our house. We didn't know what it was about initially, and we were surprised when they started asking questions about my grandmother, my father's mom. Apparently, she had been missing for a while now. She liked to travel a lot, so no one thought much of it at first, but when no one had heard from her in 3 months, that's when family started to get concerned. The last person who had seen her? My dad. Around the time she vanished, there was a body found about a mile away from where she was last seen. The remains were in bad shape, but a family member of ours was able to ID her based on a facial reconstruction. I'm still amazed at how much that recreation looked just like her. My dad quickly became the main suspect, and police arrested him on suspicion of murder. And that's when all of the truly horrible details started to trickle out. Apparently, he and my grandmother had gotten into an argument, and he took her life. But he didn't stop there. He dismembered her and buried her in a shallow grave right down the road. One of the most horrifying things that the police told to us was that she may have still been alive when he started cutting her up. That's something that I still can't wrap my head around. Even with all the police had against him, he denied everything at first. When, out of nowhere, he eventually came clean and gave a reason that was somehow even more disturbing than the act itself. He told the authorities that he thought that his mother was a reptile wearing human skin. He wanted to cut her open to prove it. That's what he said. That was his explanation. He ended up being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. After a psychiatric evaluation, they charged him with murder, but what he was ultimately convicted of was manslaughter, a crime that would carry much less time in prison than a murder sentence. The verdict was delivered in 2014, and he was sentenced to 18 years, although only 9 of those were to be served behind bars. The rest of the time would be under supervised release. And that's about what happened. He got out in 2022. It's now been 3 years. I'm an adult now with my own life, living several countries away. Although he's supposedly not allowed to leave the country under the terms of his release, I'd be lying if I said that made me feel any safer. This is someone who threatened to kill us, who once stood outside of our house miming slitting our throats, someone who had callously murdered and mutilated his own mother, and now he's just out there walking around free. I think about that postcard a lot. It showed up right around the time that he killed her, and I still don't know what to make of it. Why he sent it, what it even meant. All I know is that someone with a history of violence like that shouldn't have been let out of prison so easily. In my heart, I feel like the justice system completely failed here, and it scares the hell out of me knowing that he's still out there somewhere. And I know if you're hearing this, it's easy to think, no way this is real. I get it. That's a normal reaction when you hear something this messed up online. But I promise you, it's 100% true. If you look up the Castorphin Hill murder, you'll find all the details. The man who did it, that's my father. When I was 20, I ended up in the hospital with a bunch of infections thanks to an underlying immunodeficiency. One of the infections was bad enough that it had to be surgically removed. The whole stay was an utter mess. At one point, I was misdiagnosed with AIDS, and then later with necrotizing fasciitis. All of this at one of the best hospitals in the US, mind you. But the most disturbing part wasn't the misdiagnoses. It was something that happened one night that I still can't fully explain. It was around 3 a.m. I wasn't fully asleep because I'd slept most of the day, and a light from the hallway kept catching my attention. That's when a nurse came into my room. Not my usual nurse. He was a younger guy that I'd seen regularly. This was an older woman, maybe in her late 40s, and I'd never seen her before. She had this cold, distant vibe and didn't say much other than something like, "Time for your medication." She pulled out a syringe, and right away I noticed it was massive. Definitely not the usual size for my morphine. I was used to getting doses from something like 10 or 20 cc syringe. This one was easily 5 times that size. I tried to ask her if she was sure she had the right dose, or the right patient, trying to keep it light so I wouldn't come across as difficult. But all she did was ignore me. Eventually she said, "Just go to sleep. This will all be over soon," before she injected the medication. I laid there trying to convince myself that it was probably fine. Hospitals are weird and chaotic, and I figured maybe it was just a new nurse and a different routine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off here. I even thought about kinking the IV to set off an alarm, but I didn't do that. I just tried my best to relax. Then it all started. At first, I felt hot, red hot, like my skin was radiating heat. Yet inside, I felt cold. My whole body tingled with goosebumps. Then slowly, I stopped feeling anything at all. It was like all of my nerves had just disconnected. Then everything turned red. Not literally, but it felt like I was seeing the world through a red-tinted filter. and everything pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. That's when the distorted hallucinations really set in. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut. I couldn't tell what I was actually seeing and what I was imagining. Eventually, I couldn't even feel the bed beneath me. I felt like I was floating a few inches above it. Somehow, through all of this, I managed to hit the call button. I have no idea how long it took, but nobody came right away. And at that point, I was losing motor control. My arms, hands, legs, they all felt like they weren't mine anymore. I was trapped in my own body, slowly becoming more and more aware that this wasn't just a weird side effect. What I was going through was serious. The scariest part, though, was just how peaceful it all felt. Nothing felt urgent. I wasn't panicking. And as I think back, I don't think I was even capable of panic at that point, even though I clearly should have been. I had to fight just to focus on breathing, in and out, over and over again. Then finally, after what felt like half an hour, that's when my regular nurse walked in. The second he came through the door, everything snapped for me. It felt like whatever fog I was under got pulled off of me all at once. I sat up suddenly and, without warning, I vomited clear across the room, like full-on projectile. He rushed over, helped clean me up, and stayed with me for a while. I could move again. I could even talk. That's when he told me another nurse had been helping out that night and accidentally gave me the wrong dosage. That was all he said. He didn't explain how it happened or who the nurse even was. And truly, he seemed just as rattled as I was. It wasn't until much later, years really, that I started to think more about it. I was in the terminal ward at the time, and I was by far the youngest person there. Most of the patients there were 50 or 60 years my senior. I'd been semi-conscious for days, clearly in pain and not making much progress. And that particular nurse, I never saw her again. Didn't know her name, didn't even see her face clearly. Was this just a mistake? A fluke of some sort? Or did someone decide I didn't need to be there anymore? I still don't know. What I do know is that I refused morphine for the rest of my hospital stay, and I haven't touched it or any other strong painkiller since. There are some things you just can't forget, no matter how much time may pass. So, a few years back during my senior year of high school, my stepdad made a very poor decision. This decision has caused a lot of pain and suffering for both my mom and myself, as we're both still in counseling for PTSD, as well as anxiety disorders. Just for a little context, my biological parents got divorced when I was 7 years old. I'm also a female, if that matters to anyone. By the time I was in my teens, I was used to seeing each parent dating other people. And I was actually very happy for my mom when she told me she met somebody new. That is, until I met him. As soon as I met this guy, we'll call him Don, I had this horrible gut feeling. Don was originally from Florida, and he moved to Kentucky right before he met my mom, leaving behind his wife, who he was in the process of divorcing, as well as a son. He was a weirdo in just about every sense of the word, always trying to start an argument over petty topics, or walking around shirtless with his strange nipple rings hanging out, all while my friends were over. Although this guy was weird, he was never threatening or abusive at all towards me or my mother. That held true until one night right before my mom's birthday. I remember that night pretty clearly, actually, because it was my best friend's birthday, and I was waiting for her to come pick me up to go to dinner. My mom and Dawn also had plans to go out that night. They were going to go watch the University of Kentucky versus the University of Florida basketball game. As an only child, my mom has always been very protective of me, so she wanted to wait until I left with my friend before she left with Dawn. This, for whatever reason, really pissed Dawn off, and he stormed out of the house without her. I left shortly after this, and I returned maybe 4 or 5 hours later. The basketball game had been over for quite some time at that point, but Dawn hadn't come home yet. My mom was acting weird and nervous when I asked about him, but instead of stirring anything up, she just ushered me off to sleep. Well, as I was sleeping, I was woken up by my mom screaming my name. Obviously disoriented and groggy, I groped around for my phone thinking maybe I had overslept and was late for school. When I checked the time, it was near midnight. My mom screamed my name again and told me to shut my door and call 911. This is pretty much when it hit the fan. I started freaking out. I jumped up, ran over to my door to slam it and lock it. Just as I did this and began to slink back towards my bed, 3 gunshots flew through my bedroom door, narrowly missing me. I grabbed my phone and jumped to the other side of my bed and laid flat on the ground, hoping to avoid any more bullets that might be coming. I barely had time to get out my address and inform dispatch that there was someone trying to kill me before I heard my mom scream one last time before 2 more gunshots rang out. Everything in the house fell silent, and I had this horrible feeling that someone had just taken my mom's life. I got up from the floor when I heard the person begin to throw themselves against my door in an attempt to break it down. All that was running through my mind was getting to my mom and staying alive. Eventually, he broke my door down, and I was horrified to see that it was my stepdad. His eyes were red and glazed over as he grabbed me by my shirt collar and put the barrel of the gun to my head. I screamed and fought as he said over and over, "Is this what you wanted?" At this point, a lot of the finer details get hazy, as I had a ridiculous amount of adrenaline pumping through me. But I somehow managed to back him up and push him down onto my bed. I used both of my hands to hold his hand with the gun away from me, and I tried with all of my might to get it up against his head so I could blow this fucker's brains out. We struggled like this for a while, until my mom came stumbling in, gunshot wounds to the neck and stomach. She laid across the gun while telling me to run. I hysterically ran out my front door and up the street to my neighbor's house. I'm sure I scared them half to death, but I was able to redial 911 and tell them exactly what was happening. As I was at my neighbor's, my mom was still in my room with my stepdad. She says this is where she became very weak from blood loss. She rolled off of him onto the ground. She asked him why he was doing this, and he simply put the gun into his mouth. She took that opportunity to run out the front door right into the arms of the arriving police officers. In the end, the cops ended up having a standoff with Don as he barricaded himself inside the house. He eventually made the mistake of pointing his gun at them, and they in turn blew half of his dick off. A little bit of small retribution before arresting him. Don is currently serving 45 years in a Kentucky state prison, and to this day will give no reason as to why he decided to do this to us. In all honesty, I don't care what his rationale was. My mom and I lived through it and have grown so much closer because of it. We actually ended up getting matching tattoos that read, "Strength comes from the madness we survive." So Don, get f***ed. And I really hope everyone in prison enjoys both you and your half penis. I had mostly forgotten about this story until someone plugged me into this sub. After thoroughly creeping myself out for a few days, I decided it's time for me to contribute as well. For many years, I spent my summers working in a major southern US city with a moderately high crime rate and some serious racial conflict. Now, I grew up in New York City and live there to this day, and I'm not overly afraid of walking around in some of my city's more infamous areas at night. But I think it's important to respect the city that you're in, and I knew that this southern city was quite a bit more dangerous for me to walk around alone in, especially as a young petite woman. For reference, I'm about 5 feet tall, 110 pounds. I'm pretty strong, a lot stronger than people think by looking at me, but I know better than to think I would do too well in a one-on-one fight. To be honest, in my summer city, I wouldn't usually even walk home alone after work since I worked until about 10 p.m., sometimes later, even though it was only a 10-minute walk. It seems silly to ask someone for a ride when it was a lovely and short walk through this gorgeous city, but I also just knew that I didn't feel safe. It wasn't even the caution I've sometimes felt in a crummy neighborhood back home, but just a totally different feeling, a complete inability to confidently be safe. I love my summers there, but I avoided being alone after dark at all costs. But as often happens, we make little compromises. It was midnight this night, and the only other person in the office was staying for another couple of hours while one of the events we were managing wound down. He asked if I wanted him to drive me home, but I knew that this would mean locking the entire building up, driving like 2 minutes, then 2 minutes back, disarming the security system again. I just felt silly to ask, like a scared little girl, so I said, "No, I'll be okay. I only live a few blocks away." And I went off on my merry trip. I walked with my head up, stride sure, ears open, just like I do back home. I got 1 block, then another. It was a gorgeous night out, and I let myself enjoy it and relax just a little bit, as I hoped in vain for a gentle breeze to cool me off a little, and enjoyed the symphony of the various insects that came out that night. It was ungodly humid, and I didn't see a single other person. Definitely a different type of city than New York, but I could hear the gentle hum of nightlife from the main drag 1 avenue over. I got a 3rd block, and then I finally saw another person. A man. Of course, I thought to myself as my anxiety ratcheted up, and I instantly admonished myself for my bias. After all, I was walking alone at night. Why didn't a man have the same right? But, and this has never happened to me before or since, something about the sight of that man, that specific man, absolutely terrified me. I couldn't put into words why for you. He was in his mid-20s and had long, shaggy hair. As the moonlight reflected off of him, I could see that it was blonde. Everything about him struck me as just sort of an anomaly. He looked like a surfer, not a stalker. In my approximation, and at that time of night, he actually looked pretty cute. And yet, I could hardly bear to look at him, because looking at him filled me with both fear and apprehension. I know that you can never tell, but it really just struck me how much this guy did not look like the sort of guy who would terrify me, and yet how absolutely terrified he made me feel for reasons that I couldn't articulate. There was nothing objectively scary about him, and yet I just felt this sickening dread as we slowly approached each other. It wasn't just that I was alone at night. I don't know to this day what it was, but I knew that he scared me. He was walking towards me, and I had to walk towards him to get home. We got closer, and as we did, he got bigger and bigger, and I just felt smaller and smaller with each step I took. Maybe a minute passed. Soon we were on the same block. I willed myself to just get past him and get it over with. And yet, when I was about 20 feet away from him, I stopped cold. Again, I don't know why, I just really didn't want to walk past him. It almost felt like I couldn't make myself go, even if I wanted. This is ridiculous, I thought to myself, and I even began to blush in the dark summer night, embarrassed by my own behavior. But just to ease my mind, I crossed the street, and I dealt with feeling foolish. But just then, he crossed the street too. That was my sign. "Don't come any closer to me," I said loudly without even meaning to. It just came out of me. It surprised me how complete it was, how it was exactly what I felt and exactly what I wanted most in the world at that very moment. "Don't come any closer to me." How it was a command, not a request. Don't. I never heard myself sound so sure of anything before in my life, honestly. My voice was the first real sound I'd heard in several minutes, and I was surprised at how loud it felt, breaking the tension and finally starting this, whatever this was. He looked like it startled him too. After a moment of pause, he said, "Don't be scared," and he just kept walking right towards me. "I'm not scared," I said. "I just don't want you near me." We stood there for a moment at an impasse, looking at each other intently. "Please," he said, "I got mugged. Someone stole my wallet and my phone. I don't have any money and I need to call someone to come get me. There's a gas station 1 block over, man, on that avenue right there." I pointed to the right of us. "I'm sure they have a phone for you." "I'm not from here, and I had too much to drink, and I don't want to get lost," he said. I surprised myself with all the red flags I noticed as soon as they went up. His clear and sober-sounding speech, his local-sounding accent, the fact that I was the first to speak, the one to initiate this dialogue, when if he was the one who needed help, you'd think he would have said something first. The weirdness of someone going out alone and getting drunk on their own in a strange city instead of hanging out with friends or drinking moderately or anything like that. I know it's not impossible. I've traveled alone myself and enjoyed my own company in plenty of bars, but it all just seemed like a bunch of relatively less than common stuff. And all taken together, it made me wary. He continued on. Will you walk to the gas station with me? Or maybe I can just borrow your phone. No, I said. You should turn right and walk until you come to the next intersection. You'll be at a very busy road with the gas station on your left-hand side. Please, could you just help me? He said. I'm not going to hurt you. I just need help. He started walking again, towards me. Slow, like how you would approach a cat. Seriously, what's wrong with you? I just need your help. At that point, I thought of my Leatherman and my flick knife, both of which I used regularly for work, both of which were buried somewhere in the bottom of my hellishly messy purse. My fingers twitched with longing, but I didn't want to be distracted, so I didn't start fumbling around for them. I told you, I said, raising my voice. Don't come closer to me. I stepped backwards and hated myself for doing it. It felt like sort of a mini surrender. And that's when he took another step forward. I won't hurt you, he said. I began crossing the empty street again, walking backwards at first just to keep my eyes on him. And I said, I'll scream. There's a cop who's stationed on a bike 3 blocks away. He's there every night and he'll hear me. He'll be here in seconds. You really should turn right at this corner and it'll take you right to that gas station. If you say so, he said, and I felt the distinct and chilling question within myself of whether, in his ambiguity, he was referring to the location of the gas station or the location of the police officer. He didn't start walking. I stood there on the other side of the street, cautious of taking my eyes off him, but he didn't start walking. I did. I walked until we were directly across the street from each other, and then I kept going. I glanced at him over my shoulder after a few steps, and he was still there, just watching me, clearly going nowhere. I walked a few more steps and glanced over at him again, still standing there. That's when I picked up the pace and went a ways further. Looked back, and this time he was completely gone. He had to have moved quickly, a lot quicker than he'd been moving before when he was just walking towards me, in order to reach that intersection and turn right towards the gas station in just a few moments. I couldn't stop wondering, though, where else could he have gone, moving that quickly, without me watching? I didn't think he could have crossed the whole street and managed to hide somewhere, at least not without me hearing. I glanced at the sidewalk across from me. It was lined with trees and bushes. There were massive gardens all along it, all kinds of yards and stuff like that. There were almost no streetlights and so many shadows. He really could be anywhere. I thought about turning down a side street and heading towards the main drag where all the bars and restaurants were. I glanced down one as I passed. No streetlights at all, just sleepy, silent buildings all empty for the night. And the bright lights of the next avenue seemed impossibly far away. I kept going straight, and I tried to tell myself to calm the f*** down. He was just someone out walking alone, just like I was. Nothing more. I even managed to work up some guilt over not doing more to help him. I like to think of myself as a good person, and it bothered me that I had been so rude to someone who really might have needed help. But at the same time, I just couldn't quite make myself relax about it. I wanted to run, but I also desperately didn't want to run. Maybe it's just a leftover superstition from childhood, but somehow I felt that a chase never truly begins until you start running. So I walked, quickly. I looked back, I saw shadows, so many of them. I walked quicker. I looked back again, still nothing but shadows. I willed myself to calm down, but I just couldn't make it happen. Finally, I hit the block where the cop on the bicycle was always waiting behind a few trees. With that grove in sight, that's when I broke into a run. That chase was finally on, if it ever would be. I sprinted, and then as my panic grew, I pushed even faster down that final block. The cop heard me running his way before he really saw me. "Miss, are you okay?" he asked as I approached. still largely shrouded by the shadows of the trees behind him. "Yeah," I replied, feeling almost silly immediately. "I'm fine, sorry. I got scared." I smiled an apology and began to make fun of myself, the way we so often do when we feel stupid. But the cop was already looking behind me, over my shoulder. "Sir?" he called loudly, finally coming out from behind the trees to fully be seen. "Is there something I can help you with?" "No thanks," I heard a voice say. I turned around, and there was the man, no more than 30 feet behind me, just staring right through me. I can only think that he followed me after all, slinking along in the shadows. Then he walked when I walked, and eventually he ran when I ran, even though full-on running meant abandoning his cover. "Do you know him?" the cop asked. "No," I said quietly. "He told me he got mugged and he wanted me to help him, but I was scared, so I didn't. I didn't help him." Even in that moment, I felt just a twinge of guilt. I waited for the man to come closer, to tell the cop that he'd been mugged, that he needed a phone, to prove that I was the horrible person in the situation, not him. But he said nothing. He waved, then turned around and started walking the other way. He didn't look back. I waited with the police officer and we watched him walk for several minutes. And then I asked the cop to escort me to my home a block away. When he got to my front door, the cop asked me if I was okay or if I wanted to make a formal statement. I couldn't really think of anything that I would even say. I was out walking alone and I saw another person out walking alone, and I yelled at him when he asked me for help. Then he followed me? All I really know is that he was blonde. In addition to that sounding wild in my own head, I was a bit shocked and stunned, so I just said no, thanked him for helping me get home safely. I went inside and used my flashlight to get to bed, too scared to turn on any of the lights in my house, out of fear that they would render me visible from the street. It wasn't until I was already in bed, sweltering in my unair-conditioned bedroom because I couldn't bear to open the windows, that I found myself wondering, if I hadn't run, if he hadn't been forced to run and thus abandon the silent but uneven cover of the shadows and the trees, would the police officer have seen him at all? Or would he have remained hidden, watching me, following me right up to my doorstep? And if so, what then? About 2 winters ago, my husband and I bought a small farm and moved to a quiet town in Appalachia. It was a big life change for us, but we'd been saving and dreaming about a quieter type of life for a while. Things were still new to us, and we were just figuring out how to live more independently. That meant learning where to get propane, feed, hardware, a lot of things we'd never really had to deal with before. One day, we went to our local Tractor Supply to pick up a propane tank. It was cold out, and the place wasn't very busy. We figured that it'd be a quick in and out. While we were standing in line to check out, this man walked in behind us. He looked like he was in his late 50s, older, scruffy, kind of had that weathered look that some people get from working outside a lot. He walked in the door, and the moment he saw us, he just stared, like full-on stared, almost like he was trying to place us. Then, without really looking, he grabbed some random woman's shirt off of one of the shelves and walked right over to stand behind us in line. And when I say behind us, I mean way too close. He was practically breathing on my neck. It instantly made me feel uncomfortable, although I tried to brush it off. Told myself that it's just a small town and maybe people don't think twice about personal space around here. So I turned around, gave him a quick smile, nodded, and said, "Good morning," hoping that it would kind of give him a clue that he was crowding me. Didn't work. Instead, he took that as reason to start talking. At first, it was a lot of harmless small talk. Things like, "Sure is cold out today," or "This line's taking forever." Something about needing to pick up his great aunt from the airport in a couple of hours. Then he started asking questions that felt a little too personal. "Where are you guys from? Where are you living now? How old are y'all?" For context, even though I was in my late 20s and my husband just a few years younger, we both have pretty young faces, that baby face gene. People often assume we're 20, maybe 21, It felt like this guy was trying to figure something out, and the tone of his questions started to make me a little uneasy. When it was finally our turn to check out, I told him, "Have a great day," and turned toward the cashier, hoping that that would be the end of this interaction, but of course it wasn't. As the teenage kid behind the register started explaining propane pricing, this man behind us lost it. He raised his voice saying stuff like, "Oh, I can't believe y'all are charging them that much for a propane tank. And they're a young newlywed couple. Why can't you just give them a break?" He wasn't even talking to us anymore, just laying into this poor teenager working his weekend shift. That's when he turned back to us and said, "Hey, I've got a 100-pound tank at my house that I'm not using. You guys can have it if you want it. You just gotta come with me to get it." My husband politely said no, but the guy pushed again. "You sure? My place is only 20 minutes from here. I could give you 2 tanks. Again, my husband said no, thanking him, but clearly not interested. That's when the man said something that didn't click with us until much later. "Come on. We just have to go now, though. I'm heading to the airport to go out of town in a couple of hours." Which was strange considering earlier, he said that he was picking up someone from the airport. At that point, I stepped in and said, "No thank you," just in a firmer tone. He didn't say anything else, just tossed the shirt that he'd grabbed onto a shelf nearby and walked out of the store. Now at this point, I thought that was it. I was sure of it. But as we headed outside to get our tank filled, we saw this man's pickup truck parked right next to the propane fill area. He got out and walked right up to us again, acting like nothing weird had just happened inside. He started in again. "You should really think about getting a second tank. It'll save you a trip later." I took that opportunity to again say, "No thank you, we're good." That's when he flashed us a smile that still makes me shudder to think about. He said, "Come on, it's a small town, it's safe. I'd never hurt such a lovely young couple." Right about this point, one of the employees from the station came out and told the man to get the hell out of there, to stop bothering us. The man didn't argue. He got back in his truck and drove off. We caught one more unsettling detail just as he left the parking lot. This man's truck didn't have any license plates on it. Well, a couple days back, we ended up back at our Tractor Supply yet again, filling up a propane tank. The employee helping us remembered the entire situation. He asked us if we'd ever seen that guy again. Apparently, this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. That guy tends to come around every winter, always when the town is quiet, and he only ever attempts to speak to young couples. Major creep vibes. Best case scenario, all that was waiting for us at this man's house was a propane tank. Worst case scenario? Well, that's something that I don't want to cost myself any sleep by thinking about. I'm an immigration inspector in an Asian country. I'm not a cop, but we do a lot of similar work. I work at one of the biggest airports in the country. I was recently working a line for residents of the country returning from travel, when a man a few removed from the front of the line caught my attention. This man was incredibly thin, looked to be in his 30s, and if I'm being honest, he didn't really look like somebody that would call this country home. My first impression was that he was super unkempt, dressed in tattered clothes, seemingly hyperactive, moving around a lot, maybe even a bit paranoid, talking a million miles a minute, giggling at himself, super in-your-face friendly, something that by itself isn't only unsettling, it's a bit suspicious in my line of work. To add to it, his travel companion was a non-native female who looked to be no older than 15. She was the apparent opposite of him in every way. Well-dressed, silent, stiff and still, extremely tense, no emotion. That's already sketchy enough, so in accordance with our human trafficking recognition and reaction guidelines, we separate them. Since I was the primary inspector, that was my job. I determined the best course of action is sending them to our investigatory area's waiting room, getting police present to help separate the girl to bring her to our safety room, and get him into an interview as well. The first part of the plan went perfectly, but when I went to lead him to our interview area, that's when his demeanor completely changed. He went from an excited, hyperactive anxiety to a much more calm, seemingly angry state. Originally, he was making large, dramatic hand movements, talking loudly, but now he was just quickly glaring at me and then muttering to himself. We get him seated and situated. I describe the situation to my supervisor, and I come back with a partner to start my interview with him. I introduce both myself and my partner, and we start asking the typical immigration questions. Why are you here? Where are you going? What do you plan to do while here? How long will you be staying? For everything that I asked, he had vague answers, a lot of which didn't make sense. He was here for business. He was going to a nearby city but couldn't name where. He had a business conference but couldn't explain his profession. And this was all on a one-way ticket. He also stated, unprompted, that girl was his daughter. We went over to the safety room that the girl was being interviewed in, and she stated to the interviewer through a translator that the guy was her boyfriend. She also stated that he promised her money, travel, gifts, all in exchange for sex. He was detained by our on-site police and placed in our holding cells pending an investigation. While we were searching his possessions, we were notified that he offered the equivalent of $500,000 in cash as a bribe to an officer to secure his release. Through the course of our investigation, we found a total of $850,000 exactly, undeclared, in a secret compartment in his luggage. A judge then approved a seizure of his electronics, and the National Police Electronics Crime Lab found 18 gigabytes of photographic and videographic CP, some of which included the girl that we had in custody. This all happened a few months back. As of a few days ago, he was charged with indefinite confinement to a prison or rehabilitation facility with possibility of release. This was brought down from no possibility of release after he's cooperated with police and led to 3 more arrests. He'll potentially lead to even more, the way that he's talking. The girl was taken to a hospital for medical evaluation. She was then interviewed by forensic psychologists and national police officials for another couple of days. Eventually, she was repatriated back to her home country of Greece, where she was reunited with her family. It seems like they're going to get to the bottom of what he was doing with this young girl well before any of this makes it to court. I'm glad that we got him when we did, so he can't abuse any other young girls. But it doesn't exactly sit amazingly with me that he stands to get a potentially lighter sentence due to the fact that he's telling on other creeps. I hope that however long he is behind bars, he's made to regret his actions every single day. From everything I've ever heard, inmates aren't typically too fond of those that victimize children. So a little while back, I started dating this guy that I met on Tinder. For context, I'm a female and I was 28 at the time. He was also 28. He works in finance, and at first, he seemed like a pretty normal, attentive guy. He showed a lot of interest in me. We went on several dates together, and as time went by, we started seeing each other more and more. He'd bring me flowers. He was sweet, and I could tell that he was into me. That part I liked, but I wasn't 100% sure about him from the start because we were different in a lot of ways. Still, I thought, well, I don't need someone who's exactly like me, and I wanted to give it a shot. I was always honest with him about that. I told him I wasn't sure we were compatible long term, and he said that he understood but wanted to see where things went. After a while of dating, I started to notice he had different sexual preferences. He was really into a particular type of sex, like to the point of saying it was almost a deal breaker for him if his partner didn't want to do it. Now, I'd done this specific sex act once in my life, and it wasn't my favorite thing. I told him that. I said I wasn't comfortable doing it all the time, but I was open to trying it again occasionally. Then he started telling me more about his kinks. He said he was into BDSM and that he was a sadist. He also told me he'd gone to swinger clubs before and that he had a pretty intense sexual history. Now, I'm not new to experimenting sexually, but this was kind of next level for me, especially the part about him being a sadist. What really freaked me out was when he told me there had been times where someone he was with had said stop, and he didn't, but that this had still been within the boundaries of consensual play. even if that's what he said. It gave me a really bad vibe. Maybe I'm being judgmental, but things didn't feel right. The moment things truly unraveled happened one night that we went out for drinks. He rarely drank, like I'd only seen him have a super light drink once before, so it already felt unusual. We went to this cocktail bar, kind of romantic, and started talking just a little bit more openly. I was curious about his sexual side, especially because he had said he wasn't sure where it came from. For even more background, he's adopted and had never met his biological parents. He wondered if maybe it came from something in his past. I was able to gather that he meant traumas and perhaps other things that had somehow affected him. Then he told me that he had a major fantasy about abuse, specifically about abusing others, and not exactly in a roleplay kind of way. He told me that this was his biggest fantasy. Okay, I've had fantasies about being dominated too, but always from the perspective of being the submissive one, not the aggressor. The fact that this was his main fantasy really unsettled me. He said that this was something he had acted on before, but of course with consent. So I asked him, what's the strongest fantasy you've ever had? This is where things really took a turn. He said that in his country, there had been a big wave of immigration a few years back, and he used to see a lot of immigrants living on the streets. He said one day he started fantasizing about taking a homeless woman off the street, bringing her into his home, before locking her in the basement and doing whatever he wanted to her. When he said that, it absolutely shocked me. I'm a big true crime fan. I read Reddit stories. I watch videos on this kind of stuff. But hearing someone say that to me in real life and knowing he genuinely wanted that was a whole other level. It felt like I was talking to a serial killer. And the fact that he worked in finance just added to the Patrick Bateman vibes. I asked him, wait, but you didn't actually do it, right? Because you know it's wrong? And he said, yeah, I know it's wrong. But the reason I didn't do it was because I was afraid of getting caught and ruining my life. Not because I didn't want to. At that point, I didn't even know what to say. I felt truly uncomfortable because I could tell he was dead serious. The worst part of all of this is, on paper, he seemed completely normal. Like he had a good job, friends, what looked like a regular life, and supposedly he'd never done anything illegal. According to him, everything he did was consensual with people who were into it too. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if he could do something illegal and get away with it, that he absolutely would. It felt like The Purge, you know? Like if there were no consequences, he wouldn't hesitate. And every time he stayed over at my place, I couldn't stop this feeling that he might do something to me. He even told me he had fantasies about having sex with me while I was asleep. Stuff like that. Now, to be clear, he never did anything without my consent. Everything we did was consensual, and we experimented with a few things. But I still couldn't get rid of the feeling that the only reason he wasn't doing something darker was because of the legal consequences, not because he had any moral issue with it. That was actually really hard for me to process. Part of me felt conflicted because I've had dark or messed up fantasies too. I'm not claiming to be perfect, or that the things I'm into are morally superior. But none of my fantasies ever involved doing something that extreme to someone else. They were always about me, not about causing harm to someone in a severe or degrading way. His stories were just so intense. The bondage, the sadism, the whole fixation he had with those themes. It wasn't just something he liked. It felt like it was part of who he was. And even though he had clearly explored a lot of it, there were still things that he held back from doing. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't want to deal with the consequences. In the end, it was a deal breaker for me. I stopped seeing him. It blew my mind that this guy was walking around acting like this sweet, gentle, even kind of naive person. And yet, he had some of the most disturbing sexual desires and experiences that I've ever heard. I've dated quite a few people, but nothing has ever come close to this. And again, I just want to say he never violated my consent, but I can never fully trust him. That was the main reason I ended things. Funny enough, I was reminded of all of this today because he popped up on Hinge. I guess he saw my profile, and I had a picture up that he had actually taken of me. He sent a rose to that photo, probably as a way of trying to reconnect, or maybe just because he recognized that he took the photo. Other than this one-sided interaction, I haven't heard from him at all since we stopped talking, and I don't plan on seeing him again. But this whole experience is something that has stuck with me, and I just hope that I never actually run into him again. Edit. Something else worth mentioning here. This guy once told me that his friends used to tease him for always dating crazy girls. His words, not mine. He said he always ended up with women who had some kind of issue, like one of his exes had schizophrenia, and many had past traumas or mental health struggles of their own. He claimed that it was because he liked people with depth, or stories, that he found them more interesting. At the time, I thought I kind of related. I've had my own mental health adventure. I'm neurodivergent, and I thought maybe he just liked people who had lived through things. But now looking back on it, and really thinking about everything he told me and how he acted, it wasn't that he liked people with stories. He liked vulnerable women. He liked people who were easier to manipulate or push boundaries with. And I think that he thought he could do that with me too. He just packaged it all in this poetic nonsense about liking complicated people, when really what he liked was a psychiatric history. I think honestly, that makes this whole thing even more sickening. So here's a story from when I was 19. The funny thing is, it doesn't really stick in my memory as a scary moment until I step foot into a caravan. Then when it gets dark out, that's when things usually come flooding back. So for a bit of the backstory, my older brother, as dearly as I love him, is a bit of a dipstick. He's one of those people who goes through life on instinct. But the snag is, his instincts are generally terrible, and it gets him into a lot of scrapes. Every so often, one of those scrapes ends up involving me. One thing he kicks ass at is driving. Our dad's a mechanic, so since my brother was a preteen, he's been fixing up and racing a certain model of car. Well, actually, the racing part didn't start until his later teen years. He's never made much money from it, but as long as he gets enough for his cigarettes, weed, and booze, he's a happy bunny. Historically, I've never really gotten along with any of his girlfriends. This is in part due to my own difficulties that I've had befriending other girls throughout the earlier part of my life, but mostly because my brother has a knack for picking not so great women. So when we were chatting buzzed one night and he told me that he thought his new girlfriend Chantel was the one, I decided to drag myself back up north to meet the poor unfortunate girl. I can be pretty judgmental, and when I met Chantel, I formed a snap judgment that she was no different to his usual fare of crazy. She had the look that he goes for. Permatanned, platinum blonde girl with huge jugs crammed into a tank top. Her nails, and you can tell a lot about a girl from her nails, were cherry red witchy things, bolted on with glue and far too long to allow you to do anything practical. As I entered our living room and saw her, she was pecking away at the screen of her smartphone like a bird, trying to text. She barely acknowledged me as my brother introduced us, and I think the look I gave him said it all because before long, he was nervously chattering away about anything and everything that he imagined we had in common. I made all the effort I could after a 4-hour drive, but she and I could barely hold a 2-sentence conversation together. When my dad called me into the other room and offered me a beer, I all but sprinted out the door. "What do you think of Chantel?" he asked, casting me the sidelong glance he uses when he expects me to go off on one. I belched at him and left it at that, not really knowing where to begin. "You know, your brother's pretty taken with her," he says. At this point, I pull what my family calls my iguana look, where I continue to face the TV but look at my dad to my side. "What do you want, Dad?" "Well, you could go with him to his race this weekend." I pretty much spat my drink out at that since his next race was a country over, and I just finished a long-ass drive into town. Come on, it'd mean so much to him. Nan didn't take to her, and you know what he thinks about your ma's opinion. Admittedly, this should have been a red flag for me. My Nan is like a bullshit-seeking missile, and she's old enough that she doesn't really give a fuck. Just picture Olenna Tyrell from Game of Thrones, but Irish and constantly carrying a pack of 20 Regal in her bra. But I'm sentimental sometimes, and my big brother is such a massive fanny that my opinion probably is quite important to him. I'm sure my dad can feel my hesitation, and he presses home the advantage until I'm cramming my luggage back into my car, along with my brother's gear and Chantel's Barbie pink suitcase, which I'm pretty sure is big enough to serve as a viable alternative to the Soyuz capsule. While I probably shouldn't get further off topic, I'd like to point out that it later emerged the reason my dad wanted me to go so badly was because he had a lady friend coming around and wanted the house to himself. Fuck you, Dad. Anyway, we take the trip up. My bro leads the way while I follow him in my battered old Golf, making painfully awkward small talk with Chantel in the passenger seat as she pecks away at her phone. The first 2 hours are unadulterated hell, but eventually we start to talk a little bit more. And when I mention that I'd recently been dumped by my boyfriend, she actually switches off the screen and consoles me. She makes me feel better by putting some music on, and we bond over a shared love for a couple of bands. By the time we get to my brother's friend's place in Scotland, we're actually getting on really well. The place we're staying in is one of those fixed caravan sites. I believe they're called trailer parks in the US. It's a little dingy, especially since holiday season is mostly over, and people are leaving ahead of the site closing for the winter. But at the same time, the setting is pretty beautiful. We get set up inside. Bro and Chantel will get the bed, and I'll get the pleasure of hearing them knobbing from the converted sofa. And since the light is fading and Chantel is complaining about not having any service, my bro decides to take her to poker night at the local pub. I stick around at the caravan because I knew I'd get separated from the others and probably cornered for some awkward conversation with a pervy old man if I went. They haven't been gone for much more than an hour when Chantel starts texting me. The penny drops at this point that this is her thing. I don't know if it's FOMO or just generally being bored with her surroundings, but I figure that at any one time, she's likely texting 4 or 5 different people. I don't mind. There's Gall on TV, and with just my music playing in the darkness, my thoughts keep drifting back to my ex-boyfriend, so I'm feeling sorry for myself. Her texting style irritates me a little bit. She keeps using speech to text, but sending really long messages, and because the signal's patchy, they keep coming through either incomplete or in the wrong order, leaving me to piece together what she's talking about, like I'm in Memento or something. She also does this weird cross-eyed, tongue-out emoji at least twice per message. After a while, she talks about how the game's getting good and stops sending messages. Right as I'm drifting off to sleep, I get a call from an unknown number. I decline it pretty much out of habit because who answers phone calls from numbers they don't recognize nowadays? Then, almost immediately, the same number dials back again. At this point, I get pissed off. The boyfriend who ditched me has developed a habit of getting drunk and then calling me looking for an easy shag. I decline the call again and ignore the voicemail that was left. A short while later, I'm jerked out of my sleep by Chantel. She's texting again, asking if I'm still awake and if my bro left the keys to his car in the caravan because he can't find them. I say yes and ask how the poker tournament went. She says, pretty well. Which caravan is it again? At this point, I'm rolling my eyes, presuming they're drunk off their asses. The one with the model of my brother's car outside? You daft bint? I text back. Over the music from my earphones, I hear a noise. It sounded like a man's laugh, but it wasn't my brother's. I'm not really sure that's what I heard, but it's isolated as out in this campsite, and my heart's starting to race, so I stand up and head to the door. I can basically see all through the peephole, like it's literally black outside. There's just no light pollution out here. But as I pull the earphones out, I can hear someone crunching around in the gravel. Now, I damn near shat myself when my phone vibrated in my hand. Another text from Chantel. Let me in. X. For some reason, this was the point where my standard alone in the dark scaredy catness turned into full-blown fear. I think it was because the footsteps I could hear were way too heavy and were trying to be way too quiet. My brother's quite light-footed, but he's a loud drunk. And I just know I'd have heard him and Chantel coming from a mile off. Or my brother would have impersonated a werewolf or something that would have utterly failed. He's also like a fucking homing pigeon, and there's no way he'd have needed telling which caravan it was. I looked down at Chantel's last few texts, and that's when I noticed that there was a difference in style. Shorter, capitalized, no derp smileys. I stood frozen in the darkness. I figured that whoever was outside, they were after the car, hence asking about the keys. My mind then ran through a detailed CSI-style post-mortem of them finding my body, riddled in stab wounds and bukkake to death. I was wondering if it was just theft I had to worry about when my stream of thought was interrupted by a series of bangs and a snapping noise like a whip. Suddenly, I can see light through the peephole. I'm in full flight or fight mode now, so it takes me a while to lean forward and look through it again. The security light of the caravan opposite is on, but the door beneath it is warped and bent from being forced open. I can see one person rooting around inside, while another stands by my brother's car. Then came the words, "The girl's not here." As usual with me, flight won over fight. Pretty much as soon as I heard that, I went into the bathroom on the far side of the caravan and pushed the window open. I was sure they'd hear the noise I made getting out. First, my shoes squeaking against the fiberglass. I think that's what caravans are made of. Then the crunch as I landed in the gravel. But I didn't stick around to figure that out. I bolted into the raised woodland just behind the caravan. Not far, but far enough that I had to feel blindly ahead of myself in case I walked into a tree. Once I was completely disoriented, I waited. I waited there for a long time until I heard the first crash of another door being broken. And no more than a minute later, the sound of screeching tires. I didn't come out of the woods until I heard my brother calling for me. Even then, I waited until I could see that they were alone. I damn near throttled him when Chantel told me he'd been bragging all night about how he was going to use his poker winnings to buy new brakes for the car he raced. Being the doting older brother, he was absolutely livid that I stood by while his car had been pinched and not taken his keys with me for a jolly little game of cat and mouse with some criminals in the woods. I have no idea how I got mentioned at this poker night, but I'm very glad that my brother's now wife texts like a child on morphine, and that my scumbag ex dumped me so I could mope around in the dark. I have no doubt that that played a part in why the caravan I was in was picked second. I wish I could say that this is the first and last time that my brother nearly got me killed, but it's not. Maybe I'll share more one day. But for now, thanks for listening. I was about 9 years old when this happened. My parents had been separated for a couple of years by then, but things in my life had never really been peaceful. Not before this, certainly not after. To really understand how terrifying this experience was, you're going to need a little bit of background. Growing up, we were always poor, like just scraping by poor. At one point, my parents were trying to rebuild a house in one of the roughest neighborhoods in our city, a spot that was completely overrun with drugs and crime. It wasn't ideal, but it was all they could afford, so it was either that or be on the streets. The house itself was never finished. It had half-built rooms, bare brick walls streaked with water damage and mold, along with piles of construction materials scattered just about everywhere. The place felt like it could fall in on itself at any moment. It actually sort of mirrored everything else in our lives. On top of all that, my dad was violent, unfaithful, and barely around. When he was, you best bet you could hear him yelling at both me and my mother. Well, one night, pretty much out of nowhere, my mom woke me up after my dad had passed out. She threw a jacket over me and said we had to leave. I didn't ask any questions. I don't know what I would have asked at that point in my life, but we just left. We ended up living with relatives in another city for about 2 years before we moved back. Once we did, we found a small place to live, somewhere my dad didn't know about, at least not at first. But it didn't take long before he started asking around town, trying to figure out where we'd landed. And eventually, he found the answer. Now, here's the thing. Even after everything, I still wanted to see my dad. I was young, and even bad parents can seem like heroes when you're a kid. I missed him, so I begged my mom to let me visit. After some legal back and forth, the court eventually granted him visitation rights every other weekend. For a while, that was the routine. He was living with a girlfriend in that same half-built house, and I'd stay there on weekends. My younger brother, who was 3 years younger than me, lived there too. He was a result of an affair my dad had with this girlfriend while he was still with my mom. All that stuff, though, didn't matter to me. That was adult stuff. Me and my little bro were really close. We used to turn that broken down place into our own playground, using the empty lots around it, the busted furniture, bottle caps, and leftover bricks to form our own little adventure land. Looking back on it, I think our imaginations were the only thing that saved us from realizing just how bleak that place really was. My dad always liked to talk big. He'd say things like he was going to win my mom back, or that I had to make sure no other man ever got close to her. I didn't know what to think about that. Part of me still wanted that fairy tale ending with some picture-perfect family reunion, although I think I knew better. That wasn't going to happen. My dad barely took care of me while I was there with him. Most of the time, I spent with my brother or his girlfriend, while he came and went like he pleased. I think even at that young age, I knew my dad didn't want to care for anyone except for himself. Well, one weekend, things were starting to wind down. It was almost time for him to take me back home to my mom. But instead of sticking to the usual plan, he suddenly barked at his girlfriend and my brother to leave the house. I think this sort of surprised her, since she tried to argue, but he shouted until she backed down and eventually left, dragging my brother with her. That's when my dad told me that we were going somewhere else. We ended up walking down the steep hill that the house sat on, and ended up at a woman's house that I'd never seen before. My dad acted casual, introduced us like it was no big deal, said that I'd be staying with this woman for a little while. Now that was strange enough, but before I could think to ask anything, the woman smiled warmly, disappeared into her kitchen, and came back with a big glass of chocolate milk, which at that time was my favorite. I drank it without hesitating, but within minutes, everything started to blur. I got so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. Then I assumed that I fell asleep. Once I came to, I was back at my dad's house. But the entire scene was chaos. My mom was there, crying, screaming, completely hysterical. My dad stood in front of her, panicking and pleading, repeating the same line over and over. "Don't do this. Don't do this." I think I heard that line 10, maybe 20 times before my mom scooped me up like I was still a toddler and carried me outside. It was clearly late. The streets were all empty, but she kept going. She carried me all the way to a bus stop where we waited for what I believe was the last bus of the night to take us home. I didn't fully understand what had happened until years later. My father had kidnapped me. Instead of bringing me back like he was supposed to, he took me to another woman's house who happened to be one of his mistresses and advised her to drug me. He then left and showed up alone at the meeting spot, told my mom she'd never see me again unless she agreed to take him back. Then he left her there with no answers and no way to find her son. My mom completely lost it. She ran to his house, screaming for him, but he wasn't there. So she waited on his doorstep. Once he finally came back, she didn't beg, she didn't cry. She looked him straight in the eye and threatened to go to the cops if he didn't take her to me right then and there. To this day, I don't know why she didn't do that immediately, but I don't believe that she was bluffing, and I don't think he thought she was bluffing either. He believed her. She was screaming loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. And I think it took that exact scene to pound into his head what the consequences would be if she didn't get her son back. That's what made him crack. So he went back, got me, and brought me to my mother. I think that's when I woke up. That's when I saw her, shaking, crying, and somehow still strong enough to carry me right out of that nightmare. I think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. About the alternate reality where my dad's plan actually worked. About how he made me vanish just to coerce my mother back into a relationship with him. But then I'm snapped back to reality, and I think about how even in the face of something truly horrifying, my mom didn't flinch. She just came for me. After that night, and for many years to come, I stopped seeing my dad as anything to me. Certainly not a hero. That spot? Reserved all for my mom. I can't discount the bravery that it took for her to flash on my dad the way that she did. And I'm truly grateful for the lengths that she went through just to get me back. I was about 25 years old when this happened. At the time, I was working at this small coffee and dessert shop, tucked away in a quiet corner of our city. It wasn't the kind of place that got much foot traffic. Honestly, half the time people didn't even realize it was there. So when I worked early shifts, it was just me alone for the first few hours, until the lunch crowd slowly trickled in. One morning, a man walked in by himself, and right away I recognized him. He had been there just the night before with what looked like his family, a wife, 2 adult kids. At least, that's who I think they were. That was the only time I'd ever seen him before this, and nothing really stood out then. But now, seeing him alone and this early in the day, he had a pronounced vibe about him. He approached the counter, started talking to me right away. Just casual small talk at first, in addition to making his order. Usual stuff, like how quiet the place was. Did I have any favorite desserts? The weather. All typical things, but every second or third topic, he would circle back to how young I looked. He kept repeating that I didn't look a day over 18, which made me uncomfortable, especially after the third or fourth time hearing it. That's when he started talking about how he could help me out. He said that he had a job connect and could get me hired at a place where I'd make $7 more an hour than what I was making now. At first, I was kind of intrigued. I mean, who wouldn't be? I was barely getting by, and any chance to bump up my income sounded good to me. So I asked him the obvious. What's the name of the company? Where is it? But instead of giving me a straight answer, he'd just smile and move on to another subject. Kept rambling about how he knew the hiring manager, how they'd love me, how I wouldn't even need to apply, just show up and I'd be good to go. Already a slightly odd conversation, but it only got weirder when he started talking about his personal life. Unprompted and basically out of nowhere, he told me he cheats on his wife regularly. Like, just flat out said it. Like we were old friends or something. Said she knew about it and was fine with it. Then he launched into this whole story about a 19-year-old girl that he'd had an affair with, and how now she's married and apparently still thanks him for all that he taught her. I didn't even know how to respond to this. I remember trying to smile politely, all the while internally screaming for this man to just go away. While this was happening, a car drove by outside and someone waved at him through the glass door. He waved back and told me that he knew everyone in the area. It felt like he was trying to flex or prove something to me, but the whole thing just made me feel slimy. Like he was trying really hard to make himself seem connected or trustworthy, but all it did was make him seem more shady. The entire time, he kept pushing this job thing. Said I should follow him after work, and he'd take me to the place and get me in. I told him I couldn't because my car was in the shop and my sister would be picking me up. He kept pushing though, asking me again and again. Finally, just to get him to leave me alone, I told him, sure, figuring if he thought I was going to go with him, he'd stop pressuring me. But that's when the goalpost moved. Suddenly, he was saying I didn't need to drive myself. Just hop in his car and ride with him. He said the place would hire me on the spot if I showed up with him. He made it sound like some golden opportunity, but at this point, the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. I wanted to get this man his coffee as quickly as I possibly could. That way, he'd disappear. but that's when he pulls out this wrinkled white sheet of paper from his pocket and says it's his license to carry. Again, completely unprompted. He just shows it to me, gives me that line, and then says nothing else. As if that was supposed to make me feel safe or something, when in actuality, it had the opposite effect. Finally, after more and more of this bizarre back and forth, he finally told me the name of the company. He mumbled it quickly as I handed him his drink, and then he left, saying that he'd be back around the time I got off work. The second he walked out that door, I rushed to the back with my phone and started Googling. I looked up the company, the name that he gave me, the location that he mentioned, and I found nothing. No record of the business, no building in that area, not even a listing for something remotely similar. It just didn't exist. I told my sister everything when she showed up. She parked alongside of the building so he wouldn't see us right away. But sure enough, as we pulled around to leave, there he was, sitting in a car across the street from the cafe. It looked like he was waiting for me. Funny enough, I never saw him again after that. I was actually retelling the story recently to a friend, and honestly started feeling this deep pit of regret. I never reported this. Other than mentioning it to my sister, I didn't tell anyone officially. Not my boss, and certainly not the police. At the time, I didn't really process it properly. You see, I have a history of dissociation from things. This is due to some trauma that happened earlier in my life. It tends to make me slower to react in moments where I probably should have done something. Looking back at it, even though I was 25, I was pretty naive, more like 18 or 19 in terms of how I understood the world. And now I keep wondering what might have happened if I had gotten in that car that day. Or worse, what did happen to someone else who said yes? It still lingers with me a little, that I didn't say anything, and that maybe someone else wasn't so lucky. Okay, so this is hands down the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Just a heads up, English isn't my first language. I'm from the French Caribbean. So if some of the scuba diving terms aren't exactly right, just know that I'm doing my best. This happened last year between Christmas and New Year's. Where I live, it's pretty normal to go scuba diving during the holidays since it's warm year-round. My family and I booked a few dives. They're all pretty experienced divers, way more advanced than me. They've passed several higher-level certifications that allow them to go on deeper and more technical dives. I love diving too, but I don't feel confident enough yet to go without an instructor, especially if the dive requires decompression stops. Quick explanation for anyone who's not familiar with scuba diving. Once you go past a certain depth, around 20 meters or 65 feet, you can't just swim straight back up. You have to stop during the ascent to let your body adjust to the pressure, or you risk getting decompression sickness. It's dangerous and can even be fatal in some cases. So the plan was for me to do a refresher dive with an instructor before joining the more complex dives with my family. On the first day, while they were off doing one of those deeper dives, I stayed on the boat with my instructor for a more casual reef dive. There were a few other beginners on board, and I was definitely the most experienced out of them, even if I was still rusty. The instructor decided to group me with one of the new students, figuring I could handle myself well enough. After a quick safety briefing and a review of hand signals, we started the dive. It was beautiful out there. Lots of coral, great visibility. I was feeling more and more comfortable each minute, swimming back and forth between the instructor and the other student. The only issue was that it was a pretty windy day, which caused some heavy swell. Not a gigantic problem underwater, but it meant I was using up my air a bit faster than usual. I signaled to my instructor that my air level was starting to run low. Not dangerously so, but just something to keep in mind. He gave me the thumbs up, meaning he understood. That's when things took a turn. A man that I didn't recognize swam up to me. Full gear, seemed like he knew what he was doing. But I hadn't seen him on the boat. Still, I figured maybe I just missed him earlier. And that's when he signaled to me that he was out of air. Now, in scuba diving, when someone gives you the out of air signal, There's no time to hesitate. You hand them your backup regulator, sometimes called the octopus, and let them breathe from your tank until things are under control. That's exactly what I did. He took my spare regulator and started breathing from it. Once he seemed calm, I gestured that we should head over to my instructor, but he shook his head and motioned for us to ascend right away. And I mean, technically, it made sense. I was low on air, and if he really had no air at all, surfacing was urgent. But I didn't like the way that he was acting. It would have taken 30 seconds to alert the instructor and have him guide us up safely. But the guy kept insisting we go up, and now I was starting to get nervous. By this point, my instructor had noticed, and he was now swimming towards us. That's when this guy suddenly let go of the regulator and swam off, still using his own breathing device. I was completely thrown off. Why would someone pretend to be out of air, use mine, and then just swim away like that? Back on the surface, I was so seasick and disoriented from the waves that I didn't even bring it up right away. But later, on the boat ride back, I finally asked my instructor if he knew what that was about. He just shrugged and said maybe the guy got separated from his own group and needed a moment to calm down. When I said, okay, but why did he signal that he was out of air? The instructor told me I must have misunderstood. But I didn't buy that. I know what the out of air signal looks like. But whatever. I let it go. The next day, I was diving again. This time with a different instructor, a woman named Charlie. I felt a lot more at ease, and eventually I told her the whole story and asked if she knew the guy. I described him, and she smiled and said, "Oh, that's just Marvin. He's training to become an instructor. When he has a day off from the restaurant he works at, we drop him off at the reef in the morning and pick him up in the afternoon. Don't worry though, he's harmless." That made me feel a bit better. I figured maybe we just had a misunderstanding, like my initial instructor had intimated. The rest of the week was amazing. I did more challenging dives, started feeling more confident in myself, and I didn't see Marvin again. That is, until New Year's Eve. We had planned our final dive of the trip that day, a shipwreck, deep enough to require decompression stops. I felt ready for it. No on-duty instructor this time, just me and my family, although my first day instructor was going to be diving too, so I felt even more secure knowing he'd be around if anything happened. About halfway through the dive, while I was hovering near the wreck, Marvin appeared again. He swam straight up to me and signaled yet again that he was out of air. This time, I hesitated for just a second. I didn't trust him, but I couldn't ignore it in case he really was in trouble. So, yet again, I gave him my backup regulator. He started breathing from it. Then he grabbed my arm. I reached out to check his air gauge, but he just pushed my hand away before signaling for us to ascend together. But I couldn't do that. I had already been down long enough that I needed to do a decompression stop. I signed no and pointed to my dive computer to show him. That didn't give him pause. He just kept tugging me upward. At that point, I saw my dad below us, but he didn't react. He probably thought that it was my old instructor with me. My dive computer was now flashing and vibrating, warning me that it was time to start my stop. If I didn't, I knew that I'd be risking serious injury, or worse. That's when it hit me. If I let this man drag me to the surface, I could die. I panicked. I started wriggling and writhing, doing everything I could to try to get free. I couldn't scream because, just like in space, no one can hear you underwater. But eventually, my dad noticed what was happening. He swam up fast, grabbed my leg, and yanked me back down. In the process of this, I elbowed the guy, and he finally let go before swimming off. My dad and I did a long decompression stop before surfacing. I was shaking and crying when we got back to the boat. I spilled everything to my dad. At first, he thought it had been my instructor, and there was some sort of miscommunication, but when I explained, he realized that that wasn't the case. We waited for the guy to resurface so we could point him out, but he never did. The next day, we popped into the dive shop one last time because my little sisters had certificates to pick up. Charlie was there. I told her what had happened, and she immediately looked concerned. That's when she said something that gave me the chills. Marvin didn't dive yesterday. He was at the restaurant all day. He waited on me and my family. So, it wasn't Marvin down there. I still don't know who that man was then, or what he wanted for that matter. But he almost got me twice. Once by pretending to be in trouble, and the second time, I truly believe that he had bad intentions. To that diver, I hate that you made me second guess something so basic, so vital. Because of you, I'm not sure I'll ever trust that out of air sign again. And that's not just scary, that's dangerous. This is my first post here, so please be patient with me. I've been debating whether or not I should share my story. So far, the latter has won out. But as I've grown older, I've been reflecting on this moment, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are. This happened about 7 or so years ago. My family and I visited a lake in a state far away from our own for our first and last family reunion. Spoiler alert, it did not go well. Safe to say that the lack of AC during the hot summer month of July, different conflicting personalities, and 3 families in a single Airbnb caused a lot of tension, and it all blew up on the 4th of July. After midnight, my mom got fed up and took me, a 10-year-old female and sick at the time, with her to stay at a hotel. My brother and my dad stayed at the house since they were enjoying themselves and already comfortable for the night. We flew to the state, so we didn't have a car, and even if we did, it most likely would have been blocked in by other family members' cars. After much squabbling about our means of transportation, my grandparents, who happened to live in the same state as us, let my mom drive their car to go stay at an air-conditioned hotel away from the family drama. So my mom and I take off. We drove through the dark, empty streets of this small town for a while before we came across a familiar chain motel that we recognized. Since it was late and my mom had a sick kid in the car, she settled on staying there for the night. Pulling into this circular driveway, we saw a little bit of movement beneath the trees of an island in the middle of the asphalt. As my mom pulled into a parking spot, a man dressed in all camo, smoking a cigarette, emerged from the shadows of the island, and once we got out of the car, he asked, "Are y'all going to be needing a room?" To which my mom responded, "Yeah," because why else would we be at a motel? It was a little odd that this man, who I assumed to be an employee, was wearing full camo, hat, pants, shirt, and not a uniform of some sort. We ended up walking into the little lobby, which was really just a small room with a computer, a front desk, and a few armchairs. He walked behind the desk, clacking away on the computer as my mom described the room we would like. A queen bed in a non-smoking room. The man nodded, commenting, "Are you two alone?" And I can't remember if my mom responded, but he handed us a key to the room. Not a key card like I was used to at home, but a literal keychain. I thought it was odd, but then I figured maybe it was just a regional difference. This town doesn't get as much traffic as the other popular cities around it, so maybe they don't have the budget or the need for key cards. While I'm trying to work through the key situation in my head, this man is trying to make small talk, asking about what we were doing here, how we were liking the fireworks, things like that, before he then led us to our room on the first floor. Okay, that's not too bad, right? But then he opened our door and led us into the room while showing us around. The moment he opened the room up, the sickening stench of smoke hit us, even though we specifically asked for a non-smoking room. He started twisting the knob to the air conditioning, turning on the bathroom light, and opening the closet door, showing us where everything was. This was a tiny room, big enough for one bed, a thin closet in the wall, and 2 little nightstands, so the tour was 100% unnecessary. My mom stood outside of the room, arms crossed, almost on guard. I, being exhausted, stepped into the room, holding my stuffy and blanket, ready to knock out and go to bed. As the man walked into the bathroom, my mom finally spoke up. "Hey, come here." Her tone was stern. one that sounded like that quintessential mom warning that a lot of kids get when they're in trouble. But this one had a little edge to it. The man came back out and was milling around the room when she repeated herself under her breath. I eventually gave in and went to go see what she wanted. She grabbed me the second I crossed the threshold and moved me behind her. We walked back to the lobby to find a new room that was truly non-smoking, and my mom made sure to stay between us every step of the way. While in the lobby, he made a comment that broke the camel's back. "You two are, sure a long way from home," as he rang us up, holding onto my mom's credit card as she looked at her phone. Even though I was young, this comment made my stomach twist, and I didn't really understand why. Suddenly, the lobby filled with ringing, the tune of my mom's ringtone echoing off the walls. "Oh, 1 minute. It's my husband," she said to the man while holding up a finger to me as I prodded her. The conversation went something like this. Mom: "Hello? Hi, honey. What was that?" Me: "Mom, who is it? Why is Dad calling?" Mom: "Shh. Oh, are you with Ben? We found a place." "Oh, okay, yeah, I guess we'll see you there. Got it. Love you." Like the annoying kid I was practically tugging at my mom's sleeve, asking her where my brother Ben and Dad were. Mom shushed me again, gesturing for me to grab her card as she informed the man that my husband and kid are down the road. They already checked into a room, so we're just gonna go meet them. I'm still asking her about what was going on since I was confused. As we made our way back to the car, I flooded her with questions, and she simply just looked forward, all the while clasping my hand. I hopped in the back seat and we backed out, quickly leaving the driveway. And in a nearly cinematic moment, my mom turns to me, finally answering my questions in the most jaw-dropping manner for 10-year-old me. I lied. Whoa. Why? Now, I had always been taught about stranger danger and kidnappers, but this was different territory for me, one that most women have to live through every waking moment. She filled me in as we drove, winding through the roads back into town. While I was busy thinking about falling into a smoky and dingy bed, my mom was in full-on panic mode. Her mom instincts flared up the moment he opened our door for us, most likely trying to rationalize what was going on. Once we got inside the room, easily accessed on the bottom floor with a key that no doubt this guy had a spare of, and one that didn't meet our specifications, she came up with a plan. While we made our way back to the lobby, blabbing about a new room, she had been texting my dad, telling him where we were and to call her. Their conversation actually went like this. "Hello? Hi, honey. Are you okay? What's going on?" "Oh, are you with Ben? We found a place." "Oh, okay, yeah, I guess we'll see you there. Got it. Love you." Huh? Cue utter confusion for my dad. My mom's worries were only further confirmed with the man's strange and overly personal questions. The reality of the situation began to set in for me. A little part of me that was still innocent and naive to the ways of the world began to crack. In the end, we found a safer hotel further into town. This one had a pool, and we stayed there for the rest of our trip, later joined by my dad and brother. Now, on to the update that freaked me out even more. My brother and I recently revisited the town with our grandparents for a quick family trip, and we stayed at a house on the same lake where we had the reunion. On our way to the house, our car passed the charred remains of a building, gates and caution tape surrounding the entire area. My grandma pointed it out and informed me that that was the motel my mom and I had almost stayed at. It burned down in October of 2023. Now, I've scoured the internet for the hows and the whys and any sort of answer as to what happened to this motel, but so far, I haven't been able to find any. The name of the place did change from when we first went, but I was still able to find it with relative ease. Let me know if you want to know the name of the place in the comments. I feel like the fact that it mysteriously burned down only adds to the unsettling experience my mom and I had there. After looking back at this moment with older and much more experienced eyes, I'm very, very glad that my mom got us out of there. She has not, that I can remember, had a sort of feeling like that one since. and I've gained even more admiration for her. I'll never know what would have happened if we stayed at that motel that night, because thanks to my mom's intuition, we avoided that situation entirely. This story takes place back when I was in my early 20s. I'd like to start it off by saying, not everyone you meet online is a horrible person. In fact, I met my current wife online, but the person I'm about to tell you about was a bullet that I'm glad that I dodged. I wasn't really the kind of person to meet strangers off the internet back then, but sometimes boredom and curiosity, as well as the hope of meeting new friends, or even a significant other, had a way of steering me into bad decisions before I even realized what I'd gotten myself into. I met her off of Facebook, of all places. She popped up as a person you may know suggestion. We had zero mutuals, so in hindsight, I can only imagine she was looking at my profile often or lived nearby, or maybe we visited the same places frequently or something. Her profile picture was cute, a little blurry, possibly an old photo, or she may have used a filter, but she looked normal enough, and her name was Jessie. I messaged first, a simple, "Hey, do I know you from somewhere? You're in my suggesteds." She replied with a no, but immediately told me that I was cute and asked if I was single. I was, painfully so. Then she told me she was staying in town temporarily. We made a little small talk, somewhat flirty, but mostly just friendly chat about town and current events. I figured she was new here and maybe lonely herself. I didn't ask too many questions, nor did I think too much of it. The conversation eventually tapered off, and I forgot about it for a few days. That's when she messaged me again, saying something like, "Hey, I know this is kind of weird, but I was wondering if you could help me out. I don't know anybody else in town, and I don't have a car. I need somebody to grab a few things from the store for me. I'll pay you for your time." At first, I assumed it was a scam, as most things in this life are, but she sent me her location. A motel on the outskirts of town near the highway, and she offered me $20 to pick up a small list of items from the grocery store and then bring them to her. It actually made perfect sense, since she was about an hour's walk from the nearest grocery store and didn't have a car. It was probably cheaper and more convenient to pay me rather than take an Uber. That was the logic my brain landed on anyway. I'm not too sure why I agreed. It's not like I was desperate for $20, but she was decently cute, and I was a bored single guy. So this would be an easy way to see if she's a catfish. I didn't want to put the moves on her, so I just played it cool. Also partly because I just genuinely wanted to be a good guy in this situation. I went to the local Freshco, got her things like a case of water, some snacks, and stopped by a gas station on the way to get her a pack of smokes that she requested. The cashier actually looked at me sideways because I'd already bought a pack for myself about 2 hours before that. Then I headed off to the motel. She met me in the parking lot when I got there, waved me down. She looked like her picture, a bit more attractive even, roughly my age. She handed me the money she owed me plus a $20 bill and asked for the receipt. She didn't tell me her room number. I asked her why she wanted to meet me in the parking lot, which was a stupid question, and she had a pretty reasonable answer. "Oh, I don't give my room number to strangers." I remember feeling pretty dumb for not thinking of that to begin with. She thanked me for the stuff, and then we chatted shortly. She gave me a smoke as a tip. We only talked for about 5 minutes before I ended up having to leave. The next day, she messaged me again. "Hey, sorry to ask you, but could you do me one more favor?" During that 5-minute conversation in the parking lot, we exchanged cell numbers and started texting. She had told me she needed to delete her Facebook profile because she was being stalked by her ex. That was a pretty big red flag for me, but it would also make sense that she would be staying out of town in a motel temporarily if she had escaped an abusive relationship. I didn't exactly want to pry on such a touchy subject. This time, her request was to give her a ride to a gas station across town. She had some sort of prepaid card that would only work at certain places. She also offered me $20 in cash again, so I agreed. But I told her she didn't need to give me money, and that I was glad to help her out. So I did. It actually became a pattern. Every few days, she'd message me asking for a favor like that. A ride to a store, pick up a prescription, grab some takeout. She always offered to pay me in cash, and I never accepted the money because I figured she needed it more than me. I was also considering maybe I'd ask her out on an actual date soon. But I had some personal questions that I'd need answered first, and I didn't really feel comfortable asking them. Like where she was getting all this money without a job, and about her stalker ex, and why she's even staying here. Paying to stay in a motel every night would be extremely expensive, and she didn't strike me as somebody who just had that kind of cash saved up. I asked once what she was doing living in a motel, and she just said, "It's only a short-time thing. I don't like having roommates." Weirdly, I found myself less and less attracted to her the longer that this went on, partly because I was realizing she wasn't actually my type. And all of the vague secrecy coupled with questionable living situation threw me off. I still hung around though, maybe because I felt like she needed me. She never came on to me, but sometimes she'd brush against me in a certain way while getting into the car or compliment my looks and tell me I'm just way too good of a guy. "You're such a gentleman. There's not a lot of real good men left." Things like that. I never saw anyone else around her. Never saw her talking to motel staff. She seemed like a total loner. But one time she asked me to wait while she ran back to get some money. I watched her go upstairs to her room. She paused at the door next to hers, knocked 3 times, waited, and then went in. When she came back out about 10 minutes later, I asked if she had a roommate or something because I knew that wasn't her room that she went into. She just said, "That's my friend. We both have rooms here now. It's kind of a long story." I didn't push. Still, something about her rubbed me the wrong way after that night. I started to wonder if she was an escort or something and might be using me. I never saw her with any guys, but she lived in a motel. She always had cash. She always needed favors, and then she started dropping little hints. Like, instead of offering me money for rides, she'd joke about being extra good company with a winking emoji. I never bid on it because honestly, that's not my vibe. I didn't want to get with somebody I'd suspected was seeing other guys. Just not my thing. But I still hung around and helped her out because I felt like at this point, we'd actually become friends. This all built up to a final request. She messaged me almost out of the blue one night after about 2 weeks of not hearing from her. And I'm not talking 8 or 9 p.m. This text came through at like 1 a.m. It said, "Hey, can I ask you for a giant favor? Me and my friend are trying to get out of town. Do you think you could drive us to Toronto and drop us off?" This question actually kind of annoyed me. I think it got to me because she was skipping town without any warning after getting to know me for over a month. I was definitely starting to feel taken advantage of at this point. So it took me a while to respond, but when I did, I asked how much gas money they'd have for that long of a drive, which was about 4 hours for me as a round trip. She replied back with, "What does that mean?" As if she was surprised I'd actually asked for money this time. After a while, she messaged back again. Actually said something like, "Whatever you want it to be, baby. Seriously, me and my friend, you can have both of us. Nobody else is helping us out and we need to get to the city." My stomach dropped. I was pretty shocked by the offer and I didn't immediately respond. So then she sent another message. "Don't be a dick. You've been so cool up until now." It was like her entire attitude changed towards me and she just pulled off a mask that she'd been wearing this entire time. I simply replied something like, "Sorry, I just don't feel comfortable with this. I'm not that guy. I hope you figure things out though. Good luck." I felt my face flush even while typing it. I hit send and just sat there while waiting for a reply. But nothing would come through after that. Can't say that surprised me, but it did leave me with a feeling that I don't think I could have ignored. I went to go look up her Facebook profile again, only to find that it didn't exist. She really had deleted it when she said she did. She also blocked my number, my messenger, all of it. She immediately blocked me on everything the moment I refused to take her to Toronto. I had zero way of contacting her or even looking her up again. That was that. But that's not the worst of this story. That crazy behavior wasn't the bullet I dodged. I didn't even have her last name, because at one point she told me that the last name she used on Facebook was fake because she was trying to avoid her ex. She was just Jessie to me. I'll admit, I felt guilty, but more than that, I felt relieved. Something about that whole thing had been creeping towards something that felt wrong. And a few days later, I saw this on my local news. Man carjacked and assaulted in alleged escort robbery scheme. The victim had picked up 2 women from a motel in my town and had agreed to drive them to a discreet location where he says he was ambushed by a number of men armed with guns before he was forced out of his vehicle at gunpoint and beaten. The 2 unknown females made off in his vehicle with the armed attackers. The victim was left injured, without his cell phone or wallet, and found assistance at a local gas station. That was the bullet I dodged. I contacted the local police. I did a brief interview with them. They said that the number I was texting her on was now cut off, and without any other data that I couldn't be of much help. I know that they investigated the motel. I saw the cruisers there the night that I'd spoken to them. But beyond that, I have no idea if they ever caught her or her group of thugs. One thing is for certain in my mind, though. If I'd agreed to make that drive, I'd be lucky to be alive today. This happened back in the summer of 2013. I was visiting Montreal, Quebec, Canada for their Diversity Weekend, which was basically like Pride but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at the time had met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there so my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone that he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday, and the trip was going great. We went out the first night, walked the streets that were closed off to cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also had a tendency to lose my cell phone. So for about a year prior, I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. You may proceed with the judgments. I just wanted to give you the backstory. So that Friday night, when we went out to a club called Parking, which sadly has since closed, it was another fun night. The music was great, and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club, but would circle back and check in with my friend and our host, and I would also run into people that I knew who were also visiting from Toronto, and ended up taking a little MDMA from one of them. I danced some more until I was completely soaked in sweat. Then I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and also take a leak. When I got into the bathroom, there was someone leaving, but it looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because after taking one look at the urinal, I didn't want to come anywhere near it. Once I came out of the stall, I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked to be in his mid-30s, on the shorter side and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo t-shirt and jeans and had glasses. I remember thinking when I saw him that he reminded me of an accountant. Not sure why that thought popped into my head, but it did. I was pretty sure that I didn't hear the door while I was in the stall, but I couldn't be entirely sure, so I just smiled back and said hello as I went to wash my hands. He responded with a hello himself. "Are you having fun tonight?" I replied that I was, that the music was incredible while I was wiping myself down with paper towels and my shirt. "Do you want to do some coke with me?" he asked. Now, this wasn't the first time I had been offered coke in a bathroom at a nightclub. I'd done this in the past and ended up having some good experiences, along with meeting some interesting people. So I was already high and drunk and not thinking much of it. So I said, "Sure, I'd love to. Thanks. I just live right near here. It's at my place if you don't mind coming over. We can do some lines, have a drink, then walk back to the club," he said. Now, obviously looking back, I realize how very dumb my following actions were. And I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now, but without thinking about it, I agreed and left the club with him. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal, along with what parties I had gone to, how old I was, and my name. I asked his name, but he instead responded that we had arrived. The whole walk felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were heading. His apartment was in this building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the second. You had to climb this long, narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flicked on the lights, and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking in and noticed he had carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off, when I noticed that he was locking the door from the inside with a key above where the regular lock went. And in that moment, that's when I started to realize the danger that I had possibly put myself in. I was in another city. No phone, nobody knew where I was. And now seeing this person locking their door from the inside with a key nonetheless made me sweat for an entirely non-drug related reason. I just thought to myself, I'll pretend that I didn't see that. I won't take off my shoes, and I'll politely hang out for a few minutes before asking to head back. I also thought I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw because I was high. But as I looked around, everything inside of me was just screaming, "You need to get out of here." I went and sat on the arm of the couch. He said I should take my shoes off and relax. I was now able to get a better look at him under the light of his apartment. He still looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was fine, and I was eager to get back to dancing, so he said he would make us some drinks, and then we could get back. The apartment itself looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open floor plan with the living room beside the kitchen and then a hallway in the middle with closed doors painted black, and I could hear music coming from behind one of the doors. I asked him if someone else was there, as he came from the kitchen with a glass, and he replied no. As he handed me my glass, he looked me up and down. I wasn't wearing a shirt at this point, appropriate attire for where we were clubbing. He said, with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face, "You know, you have a beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some before photos of you before we went back?" Now, every alarm bell is going off in my head, and all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and all of his Polaroids, along with what I'm going to do because that was such a creepy thing to say. And all I can manage to get out is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say, "Sure." "Excellent," he says. He then tells me to take off my shoes, and he's going to get the Coke and his camera and to finish my drink. He walked down the hall, took out his keys, and unlocked the second door, opening it just enough to slip in before closing it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up. I ran over to the sink and dumped my drink. I put my shirt back on and ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door wasn't budging. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me, "What are you doing?" I turned around, and he was standing at the entry of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck and holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. At this point, I thanked him for the drink, gesturing to my empty glass, but that it was getting late and I wanted to get back. But we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow night. That's when his demeanor slightly changed. He was still smiling, but his tone when he spoke next sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos, and I should just wait for my drink to relax me. I said, "No, I just want to go." This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no went back and forth for about a minute, when he suddenly glared at me, put the mirror down, pointed at the couch and said, "Sit down now." Not knowing what to do or how exactly I was going to get out of this, I remembered that there were other units on each side of us, and it had to be around 2:30 in the morning at this point. So I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, the walls. "Shh, shut up. Be quiet," he snapped at me as he ran over to the door. He quickly unlocked it, told me to get out of his house before stepping aside. I bolted out that door and down the stairs, skipping the bottom steps, hopping over the side of the railing. I looked up behind me when I landed, and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to head. But I knew that the club was close, and luckily, I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to it, I found my friend in the same spot dancing. This whole incident must have unfolded in less than half an hour. I was so embarrassed about how stupid I had been, and being back in the club now, I started to feel bad that I just freaked out on this nice man, so I didn't say anything to my friend, but I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal, and I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered, trying to make light of it because it was really scary. And it wasn't until years later, after joining Reddit and this sub, along with reading other stories, that I started to think about that night more and more in depth. And I still can't quite wrap my head around just how much potential danger I put myself in that night. So, strange man from the bathroom that lured me back to his place with coke. I'm not sure why he wanted to take before photos, and it scares me to no end to know that there may have been after photos he wanted as well. I've told my closest friends what I'm about to tell you, and they urged me to share it here. This happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. For what it's worth, I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to a college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work that I don't have time to go out and socialize often, so I have to rely a lot on the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age on Hinge. We had a good convo, and then we scheduled a date. It was at a bar or restaurant, not far for either of us to drive to, so it was easy. She was very pretty in person, and we got along swimmingly. During our conversation, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, sort of like a receptionist essentially. I also learned that she had a roommate whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had this crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much. She said he's harmless, so I kind of let it go. We had a few more drinks and were there about another hour, and at her suggestion, she said we should go back to her place. And I mean, I wasn't going to argue it. She was hot. She then insisted on driving us there. I told her that I was fine to drive, but she said no, that I had been drinking and she saw far too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I only had 2 gin and tonics, and I was completely fine, but yet again she insisted. I thought it was weird, but I really couldn't care less given the situation. We got to her house, and she walked up and opened the door. She didn't unlock it. It was already open, which I found very odd because she said she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. A quick visual assessment told me that the cereal wasn't soggy either. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated, said she ate it as a snack before heading out to the bar. But that just didn't make sense. Yet, before I could say anything else, she kissed me and put her arms around me seductively, said for me to take her to her room. Again, this chick was a smoke show, so I quit caring about the cereal. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe no more than 5, we were in bed and my back was to the window when she let out a huge gasp. A gasp of fear. Her eyes were at the window. I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie, and they took off running. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure that all of her doors were locked, and of course, the front wasn't. I quickly made my way over to it and locked it. Just when I did, there was a banging coming from the other side of it. I went to go open it because I was gonna fuck the dude up, or at least try to. She told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her and asked if she was insane. she told me that he does this and goes away. That's when I asked her, "You know this is your ex?" She said yeah, and not to worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem scared at all. Kept trying to get me to go back to bed with her. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I know, this dude was a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and they'd take her side. I also just couldn't leave because my car was back at the bar, and I was utterly terrified. At this point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the serial. I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much all the way kicked in. And I told her, if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise you, I will kill you both. I'm not a hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what this was, they'd have a fight on their hands. My thoughts about what was going to happen to me were all over the place. I ordered an Uber off my phone and I didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was pretty quickly able to get dressed. The Uber showed up, and without saying another word, I opened the door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door, and she was just standing there, almost nonchalantly. Even with all the time between then and now, I honestly have no idea what the fuck I was into. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off all the factors I told you. It feels like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck type thing. I don't know. Definitely something I'm pretty mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet, and I allowed myself to get into a situation like that. Not knowing what else I could really do, I reported her Hinge account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and then I told bar management as well, if they ever saw her back in there again. I was lucky that I left that night with nothing worse than an odd story to tell, although I wonder pretty regularly if that wasn't the ending that they had in mind. Back in 1998, I was your average, broke 19-year-old guy living with a roommate named Steve. Steve was roughly my age, maybe a year or two older. His dad had died a few years prior and had left Steve a trust fund which covered all of his bills and gave him a weekly allowance on top of it until he reached a certain age, at which time he'd receive his full inheritance. Steve and I got along pretty well most of the time, but he was the kind of guy who liked to remind you if he had some degree of power over you. That aspect of his personality butted up against my own stubborn, prove the world wrong attitude on multiple occasions, one of which leading to the event I'm about to describe. Steve and I went over to my friend Trevor's house in Siesta Key, Florida one night. Steve drove as I didn't have a car. I don't remember exactly why we went over there, and I don't even know that I really remember any other instance of the three of us hanging out. I just know that we went there later in the evening, maybe 9 o'clock or so. At some point, Steve and I got into a disagreement over something. Again, I have no memory of what it was about, except that I seem to recall that it wasn't anything important, nothing that actually impacted our lives in any way. Something akin to disagreeing over a bit of movie trivia, or something as inconsequential as that. Steve must have felt that he was losing the debate though, because he took the opportunity to remind me that he had the car, and I could always walk home. Now, there are a few things to note here. First off, home would be a 13-mile walk. I couldn't have told you that at the time, but I just looked it up to tell this story. Second, we were at my best friend's house. I had stayed over there countless times and absolutely could have that night. Third, my best friend also had a car and would likely have given me a ride no problem. So Steve's threat was completely empty, whether he realized it or not. But what was important to me at that moment was that Steve, that trust fund brat that he was, wanted to exert control over me because his ego was bruised. And I was a stubborn hothead who would absolutely not stand for that shit. So I silently decided that I would walk home, just to fucking spite him and show him that I wasn't the one to be intimidated. So a bit later, under the pretense of going to use the restroom, I left the room and quietly left the house, starting that 13-mile walk home. I'd also like to note that while I knew it was a long walk, I didn't quite understand how long it was, but that didn't matter to me. I needed to prove my independence. It was probably 11 p.m. or so when I left the house. I anticipated that they'd come looking for me when they discovered that I had left, so I tried to stay off the main path as much as I could, determined to make the whole walk in order to make my point. This may also be a good place to remind you that it's 1998, and a good 3 or 4 years before I got my very first cell phone. The first hour and a half went by without incident. I made my way all the way to downtown Sarasota. The more direct route would have been to follow the main road along the waterfront, but I cut through downtown still looking to avoid Steve spotting me on his way back home. This is an area I was super comfortable with. I'd spent most of my childhood in the area, and especially in my teen years, had explored every nook and cranny of downtown. It was a pretty affluent area as well, full of high-rise condos that looked out over the Gulf of Mexico, and it was a spot known for theater, opera, and art galleries. As such, even past midnight, it didn't feel menacing at all, just quiet and largely empty. The path I'd chosen through downtown went along Pineapple Ave, which was mostly art galleries and upscale shops. As I walked along, I saw a red hatchback sitting in the middle of the road, just a little way past an intersection up ahead of me. I noticed that it had no license plate. Odd, but no reason for concern. I figured it was a tag applied for kind of situation. As I got nearer, the car remained stopped. The interior light was on, and I could see that there were 3 or 4 guys in there. The overhead light being on made me assume that they were looking at a map or something, though I couldn't make out the inside of the car well enough to see anything more than the general shapes of the people. As I crossed the small intersection, maybe 30 or 40 feet away from the car now, I suddenly got a really uneasy feeling. I don't know if it was the car being still for too long, or the figures inside too still, or what. I just suddenly got to feeling very ill. So instead of continuing on, I casually turned down the left side street, and as soon as the corner of the building blocked me from their view, I took off running. This was a spot where a small access road ran behind these buildings and then connected to an alley, and then another very thin alley that ran alongside a church and ended up back on Pineapple Ave, right where the car was. I ran the sequence of alleys and popped out just in time to see the rear end of the car vanish down the side street that I had run down. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. I had the idea that the guys in the car had something unpleasant in mind for me, but I knew damn well that I had given them the shake. There's no way in hell they'd expect me to be back where they started. If they were looking for me, it was going to be somewhere else. So I continued along, feeling rather smug. After 10 or 15 minutes, I pretty much had to get back on a main road, because the alternative was walking through a seedy neighborhood that I wasn't nearly as confident about as I was downtown. As I approached the first big intersection along that main road, I saw that red car again up ahead, noticeable by the lack of license plate. I kind of grinned to myself about having foiled them. On this big road, there were some other cars here and there, even at this late hour, so I felt much less isolated and more at ease. Until I saw the car slow to a crawl, despite not being anywhere near the light yet. Suddenly, I found myself wondering if they might have spotted me again, so I decided to just cross to the other side of the street. It's a US highway, so it's several lanes wide with a median down the center. Being on the other side would put me a fair distance away from them. But when I got to the other side, that's when I realized I was in actual danger. This red hatchback suddenly sped up, racing to the intersection ahead, and zipped over into the left lane where it banged a tire-screeching U-turn to head back in my direction. Where I had crossed was a nice green space between the History Center and the Garden Club, where a gigantic tree stood. I think it was a banyan, but I could be mistaken. On the other side of that green space was a parking lot, some buildings, and the bay. I wasn't familiar enough with what was back there to be able to pull a trick like I had before, so I climbed. I got as high into that tree as I could, as fast as I could. I was dressed in all black back then, so I was pretty confident that I'd be nearly impossible to spot, as long as they didn't actually climb up after me. So I got up and nestled into the most hidden spot I could and tried not to make any noise at all. Hiding up in that tree, I was so surrounded by foliage that I couldn't see what was going on. On the plus side, that meant that they were really unlikely to see me. On the other hand, I didn't know what to prepare myself for. So I sat up there, running through scenarios in my head, trying to plan my next move. Even if I hadn't been outnumbered, flight was really my only option. As speedy and scrappy as I was, at 5'3", no fight that I'd be able to put up would likely do much good. As I sat on that branch trying to plan my next move, my blood ran cold. Any remaining doubt about what was happening, any fleeting hope that I was just being paranoid, flew out the window as I heard car doors open and close. I heard footsteps in the grass and, eventually, an angry male voice say, "Where is this motherfucker?" Followed by a, "You look there, I'll check over here." It was official. I now knew that I was being hunted. I don't know how long I stayed up in that tree. It couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, and more likely, it was quite a bit less than that. But it felt like forever. At some point, I decided to risk another flight, though I can't remember what triggered it. Maybe it was car doors or even the car driving away. I just can't remember. I do remember jumping from the tree though, and landing with a hard thud and bolting back the way that I had come as fast as I could, terrified that whatever sound made me feel like it was safe to come out of hiding had been a ploy to draw me out. At the intersection where they had made the U-turn was a 24-hour gas station, of course, across both roads. All I could think was that if I could make it inside, I would be safe and I could call the cops. That run is a total blur for me, but I remember going through the door. I remember the look on the clerk's face as she saw my panicked expression. I called the police and explained what had happened, and I waited inside for them to arrive. When they got there, I went out front to meet them and explained everything to the only officer who actually spoke to me. He was not sympathetic. I had described the car in detail as well as all of the events, and he said they probably thought I was a male prostitute and were just trying to pick me up. I thought to ask him if prostitutes get a lot of business by fleeing from prospective Johns and hiding in trees, but I was distracted by the sight of that red hatchback slowly cruising by, watching me talk to the police. I pointed to the car and explained that that was the car. The police seemed entirely uninterested in this. He glanced at the car for a half a second and looked back at me and said, "What do you want me to do about it?" "I don't want to walk anymore," I exclaimed. I'm sure there are better ways that I could have articulated that there were people attempting to capture me for unknown, nefarious purposes, and that I was in fear of my life should they encounter me on the street again. But "I don't want to walk anymore" was all I was capable of in that moment. The cop then pointed to the side of the police car and said, "You see what it says there? It says police, not taxi." His condescending attitude was doing a great job to replace my fear with some of that brash attitude that had gotten me into this situation in the first place. So I replied, "Yeah, well, it also says to serve and protect, and I'm asking you to protect me because I think I'm in danger." He gave me a sigh like a teenager asked to do the dishes and told me that he can't take me all the way because I lived in the next town and county over, but that he'd take me to the county line, which is another major intersection along that same main highway. That was still a good 5.5 miles from my house. Again, a distance I just looked up for the telling of this story, but it got me off the road for almost 3 miles and made it less likely that these people would find me again. The cops dropped me off in front of the museum and I walked another 2 hours or so, looking over my shoulder constantly, ready to run down side streets or jump into bushes if need be. My girlfriend's house was slightly closer than my own, and with the sun now rising, I knew she'd be okay with me stopping in. In the end, I made it safely and never saw that red car again. Here we are almost 30 years later, and I still sometimes wonder what might have become of me if they had gotten their hands on me. The determination they showed in pursuing me leads me to think that nothing I can imagine, no matter how bad, is outside the realm of possibility. This happened a couple of years back, and to this day, I still don't know exactly what was going on. At the time, I was staying with my mom for the summer, a little over 2 months, to help her get settled after my dad passed away. She had just moved into a small, single-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I think we all get a picture of this kind of place. It's the kind of place where every yard looked freshly mowed. Driveways were lined with sedans and SUVs, and for the most part, people kept to themselves. From the outside, it looked safe, normal. I expected my summer to be wholly uneventful. The house itself was simple, far from brand new, but freshly renovated. When you walked through the front door, the living room opened up directly ahead of you. Off to one side was a short hallway that led to the bedrooms and bathroom. The kitchen was toward the back with a sliding glass door that led out to a small wooden deck and the backyard. That glass door is what I'll refer to as the back door for the rest of the story. So late one night, I'm sprawled out on the couch watching TV in the living room. My mom had already gone to bed about an hour earlier. The house was pretty much completely dark except for the glow of the TV. I was considering going to bed myself while I flipped between channels. And that's when I heard a knock. Like I said, it was late. There really wasn't a reason for anybody to be knocking at the front door. But the sound didn't come from the front. It came from the back door. I froze for a second, my brain trying to process if I'd really heard what I thought I did. I mean, who goes around to knock on the back door even under the light of day, let alone late at night? From where I was on the couch, I could peer over the back of it, straight through the kitchen, and see the back door. But with the porch light off, I couldn't see anything outside of it. So I sat there in silence for a good 30 seconds, just waiting to hear another knock. But there was nothing. No more knocks, no footsteps, just dead night quiet. Eventually, curiosity did get the better of me. I got up, walked through the kitchen, and flipped on the back porch light. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing on the back patio, mid-40s maybe, average height, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. His hands were tucked deep into his pockets. This was already a bit of a freaky sight, as I didn't anticipate having anybody standing out on the back porch. But what made it worse was that he wasn't looking at me. Even as I flipped on the lights, all he did was stare down at the ground. I didn't open the door for obvious reasons. I stood behind the glass and said, can I help you?" It took him a few seconds to look up, and when he did, it was slow and deliberate. When I caught a glimpse of his face, it was just off, blank in a way that didn't quite look natural, almost like he was trying to force himself to seem normal. But then he smiled. "Sorry, man," he said in a voice low and flat. "I think I left my jacket here." I just stared at him for a second. "I think you've got the wrong house." He didn't react right away. Instead, he tilted his head just slightly, almost like a dog hearing a strange sound. Still smiling though, and not saying a word. That's when things got uncomfortable enough that I started to feel that prickling sensation in the back of my neck. The one that says, this isn't right. After what felt like way too long, he finally opened up and said, "Oh yeah, okay, my bad," and turned to walk away. Here's where I might have made a mistake. Without thinking, I turned off the porch light and went back to the couch. I figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't until a couple of hours later when I woke up on the couch in a sweat that I realized something was wrong. The backyard of that house is fenced in, with one of those old wooden gates that always creaked loudly when you opened it, and made an equally loud clack when you latched it. I never heard either of those sounds after he walked away, which meant, where did he go? I got up and went to turn the porch light back on, except it didn't turn on. That's strange considering that it had worked just fine an hour or two before. I didn't go outside to confirm my immediate suspicion, but I couldn't help but think that that man had done something to the light. I mean, hell, even turning it a couple of twists, just enough that it wouldn't make contact, would keep the light from coming on when someone flipped the switch. That was strange, and even in my late night grogginess, it felt like it was goading me to go outside. But I didn't. I stayed up the rest of the night in the kitchen, watching the yard through the window, waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever did. Once the sun finally came up, that's when I got the bravery to go outside and check. The porch light was the first thing that I examined. The bulb was still in there, but it seemed like it had been loosened. One quick spin righty-tighty, and the light flipped on with no problem. I then walked through the backyard and went to the side gate. It was still latched securely from the inside, and there was no sign that it had been opened. That's when I decided to walk the rest of the property, looking to see if any windows or anything else in the house had been tampered with. Everything looked normal, secure. That is, until I got to the front of the house. Now, I don't think I would have noticed it if I weren't looking for something. But when I got up to the front door, my eyes fell on it almost immediately. The wood around deadbolt level was chipped and splintered. Not severely, but enough that you could tell that someone had been trying to pry it open. That caused my stomach to sink. It was still early in the morning, but I woke my mom up and told her everything. She called the cops. They came out, took a look around, and agreed that it did look like someone had been trying to break in. One of them walked the property line and came back with some even more strange news. Apparently, a neighbor had seen a man snooping around the backyard earlier this week, likely at a time when my mom had been out shopping or working. That's when the notion that whoever this was had likely been at the house before, scoping the place out. It meant that he likely knew my mom was alone most of the time. It also made me wonder if this whole jacket thing was just a way to test if anyone else was in the house besides her. The police couldn't do much beyond filing a report and telling us to keep our doors locked and lights on. That was fine for me, but I wasn't going to be staying there forever. Eventually, I'd have to leave and my mom would be in that house all alone. For the rest of my time there that summer, nothing else happened. No knocks, no strange men in hoodies, but I kept thinking about the way that he stood there, smiling with his hands in his pockets, camped out on the back porch like he had all the time in the world. I kept thinking about what exactly his motivation was when he unscrewed that light. The worst part of this all was that there's been no resolution. He hasn't come back, or at least not that my mom has noticed. She still lives there, and she swears she hasn't had anything strange happen since. But every time I think about that night, I get the same uneasy feeling I had standing behind that glass door, wondering if the man in the gray hoodie really just made some harmless mistake, or if he was trying to make me open that door to something much, much worse. This happened about 2 years ago, in the summer of 2023, and even now, it still makes me uneasy to think about. That was the year I'd finally started making decent money with my online business, enough that I could travel around Europe while working, all while saving toward my dream of eventually buying farmland. The year started out perfectly. I spent a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who were studying abroad. I'm originally from Germany, and being able to swap those long, gray winters for warm beaches and lively cities felt like a gift. My last stop that summer was to visit a friend, we'll call him Ben, who was studying medicine in Varna, a city on Bulgaria's east coast. Varna is an interesting place. It's got these massive Soviet-era buildings that are a little worn down, but it's also a beach city with great parks, a lively nightlife, and a lot of expats. My days were spent wandering the long, shaded parks by the water, hanging out at cafes, or joining Ben and his friends for beach clubs at night. One night, after a long day of events and then hours of dancing, I started to feel wiped out. It was well past 4 a.m. at this point, and although the clubs were still going strong, I decided that it was time to head back to my apartment. I'd done this walk a dozen times before, about 10 to 15 minutes total. Varna's layout makes it easy to get complacent. The beach runs the whole length of the city, and between the beach and the main streets, there's this long stretch of parkland. But the part I needed to cut through on my way home was a smaller, separate park, quieter, dimly lit, and closer to residential areas. Locals had actually warned me before about muggings and occasional assaults, telling me to walk with someone when I could. Usually, I just brushed this off. I'd keep my music on low and do my best to stay aware. It had never been a problem before. That night, a couple of Ben's friends left around the same time as me, but they lived in the opposite direction. After about 5 minutes walking together, I was then on my own. The streets weren't completely empty. Being summer, there were still a few people walking around and even the occasional car passing by. As I stepped into that small park, the first thing that I noticed was a man sitting on a bench maybe 50 meters ahead to my right. The bench was near a patch of trees and bushes with just one of those old spaced out street lamps casting light from behind. The man had his head down. It looked like he was scrolling on his phone. I might have kept walking without thinking much of it, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Someone was pushing through the bushes behind him. Fast. That's when I saw someone come out of the shadows at a full sprint, both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock. The man on the bench must have heard something because he turned his head just as the attacker closed the distance. He let out a shout and started running, leaping over another row of bushes on the far side and disappearing toward the street. Instinctively, I froze for maybe 2 seconds, pulling my headphones off and trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. That's when that rock-wielding person turned toward me. Even at that distance, I could see the look on his face, a wide, unhinged smile, as he hefted that rock again like he was getting ready to swing it. Then he started running at me. Adrenaline burst into me instantly. I spun on a heel, ran, cutting out of the park and across the street. But he just kept coming. I could hear his footsteps behind mine, and even after I took a sharp turn and tried to lose him around the block, he was still there when I glanced over my shoulder. I know myself. I'm not a marathon runner. I know that at this speed, I wasn't going to be able to keep up for very long. But that's when I noticed a kebab shop with its lights still on. I sprinted straight through the door. The workers inside looked at me like I just escaped a car crash, and before I could even start to explain, the man appeared outside. He slammed that rock into the big front window, cracking it, then hitting it again until it fully shattered, sending glass everywhere. For whatever reason, at that point, that's when he decided to run off. The police were called, everyone in the shop gave their statement, but I don't think it was much to go on. Other than the murderous smile I saw on his face, I don't think I was able to give any other pertinent features of this man. It was only later that I found out there had been a murder in that exact same park a year earlier. Someone had been beaten and stabbed multiple times. I obviously don't know if it was the same guy, but my gut says that this wasn't his first time trying to hurt someone. I avoided that park completely after that. When I finally made it back to my apartment that evening, I locked every door and didn't sleep much. The next morning, I realized I'd actually fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep. The stress of such a close call doesn't leave you when you go into REM. Looking back, I can't help but think about how lucky that man on the bench and I both were that night. If I hadn't walked into the park right at that moment and seen what I saw, I might not have seen that attacker heading my way. I'll admit that up until that moment, I felt very safe in a city that wasn't my own. I purposefully did something that locals told me not to do, and that at least played a part of me putting myself into danger. My advice to anyone out there: don't walk alone through a dark park in a city that you're not familiar with at 4 a.m. It might sound like common sense because I believe to most people it is. But when you're in the mode where you think that nothing can happen to you just because it hasn't in the past, you're opening yourself up to the potential of something catastrophic. And that just isn't worth the risk. I've been replaying this night in my head for a few years now. It happened back in December of 2019, just a couple of days before Christmas. I was 16 years old, a teenage girl who thought she had a decent sense of judgment, one who believed that she could read people well enough to know when something was off. I was wrong. Now, I wasn't attacked, I wasn't physically harmed, but the more I think about the way things unfolded, the more I realize how easily that it could have gone another way, and how calculated someone can be without you even realizing it in the moment. I live in a big Northern American city. This particular night, I'd been hanging out with a group of friends who lived in a different part of town. Once we said our goodbyes, I ended up heading for the subway alone. It was winter cold, kind that hits your face like needles, and it was already dark out. When I boarded the train, the car I was on was nearly empty, just a handful of scattered passengers. I picked one of the single seats, the kind with another seat positioned perpendicular to it, facing you. The other seat was empty, so I settled in, checked my phone, and figured the ride would be quiet. But a couple of stops in, a guy gets on the train who didn't hesitate to look around for another seat. He just beelined it to the empty chair beside mine and sat down as if we'd already been talking. This guy was tall, slim, chestnut hair parted neatly down the middle. Clean sweater and jeans, not overdressed, but well put together. He looked like the kind of guy that you might think was cute if you were 16 and didn't know any better. He greeted me with a hello and a smile, staring directly at me. I smiled back, which was a polite reflex, and he gave me his name. He asked how my night was going, made a little small talk, and casually mentioned that he'd just finished school. This prompted me to ask him how old he was. 24, he said. I told him then that I was 16, something that should have raised a red flag for him, but he didn't even blink. There was no awkward pause or change in tone, and if anything, the corners of his mouth lifted like he found it amusing. He said something to the effect of him missing being that age, and he also advised me to stay in school. Looking back on it, I think that was the first moment that something felt strange. It didn't take long for him to start asking me questions. Why was I alone? What I had been up to before getting on the train? Did I have any plans after this? I foolishly told him no. That's when he told me about this dare that he had from his friends, about bringing a random girl to a party that they were having, and that he wanted me to be that girl. I laughed and told him no. I said that my mom would be upset, and that I needed to get home, but he just wouldn't drop it. He leaned in slightly, elbows resting on his knees, and his voice pitched just low enough that it felt like a private conversation. He said that it would be fun, promised that he wouldn't keep me long, said that if I got uncomfortable that he'd bring me right back to the station. He kept layering on reasons until my own nose started to sound flimsy in my own head. And here's the thing. He never pushed physically. He didn't touch me, didn't raise his voice. He just kept talking and smiling, making it all sound casual, harmless. Eventually, he broke me down and I said yes, something that I kick myself about even now. We rode a few more stops together before getting off in an area of town that I didn't recognize. The train platform was pretty much completely empty, and when we climbed the stairs to street level, the air felt heavier somehow. The neighborhood was quieter than the one I'd come from. Dim streetlights casting long shadows over the street. A couple of groups lingered outside corner stores, their breath visible in the cold. Later, I'd find out that this was a rough part of the city, one known for drugs, prostitution, and overall poverty. I didn't know it then, but I did know that I felt uneasy. As we walked, he told me that the name that he'd given me earlier on the train wasn't his real one. Okay, weird. Now he said that his name was Brian. It didn't sound any more believable given that he had lied before. And then came the personal questions. What are some of your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What do you find to be most stressful? Even at 16, I found these questions weird, and I tried to keep my answers vague, telling him that school was my main stress mostly, but he pushed, saying that there had to be more than that. He said he liked getting to know people, beyond just the surface stuff. I didn't realize it then, but it feels now like he was looking for weaknesses. So we'd been walking maybe 15 minutes when a car slowed down beside us. The driver leaned over and called out, "Hey!" But Brian immediately waved him off. The car idled for a second before rolling off. As it did, Brian turned to me and said, "That was a John." I wasn't exactly familiar with the term, and he was quick to explain that it meant someone looking for a sex worker. And that made my stomach tighten even more. Eventually, we got to a townhouse that looked ordinary from the outside. There was warm light glowing from the windows, a neat shoveled driveway. Inside, there were 5 or 6 men, all much older than me. Most looked to be 20 to 25, but there were 2 that could have been 30 or older. Every single one of them stared at me. One asked how old I was, and when I said 16, another one of them muttered, "Come on, man, that's my sister's age." But instead of acting concerned, they all just laughed. After that initial awkwardness, we all sat around a dinner table. The host served up plates of food, but I didn't eat. My appetite was all but gone, replaced with this growing tightness in my chest. Other than asking how Brian and I had met, no one ever really spoke to me beyond that. Once dinner was wrapped up, everyone seemed to drift upstairs. Apparently, most of the people here were musically inclined in some way. Brian grabbed up a guitar. Another guy sat at a keyboard and they started playing. They handed me Brian's phone and asked me to film them. I stood there recording for a while, but the whole time, I was hyper aware of my surroundings. The narrow hallway behind me, the sounds of footsteps around me, the fact that I didn't know anyone here and no one in my life knew where I was. I put the phone down and my uneasiness caused me to move toward the door. That's when one of the older men stepped into the doorway, leaning his arm against the frame. He asked if I was having fun. He said that he was an accountant, and the way that he shifted his weight forward, which wasn't enough to touch me, but enough to make me take a step back, felt deliberate, like he was trying to block my exit. I didn't say anything. I just eased past him, walked down the stairs, and made my way to the front door. It was unlocked, so I opened it, took a step out into the cold winter air, and took a few deep breaths. I didn't realize until then, but Brian followed me out. I fully expected him to try to talk me back inside, but instead, all he asked was, "Do you want to leave?" I said yes. As we walked back toward the subway, I told him my mom had been calling me nonstop and was worried. He didn't question it. Instead, he chose to ask if I was really 16, not younger, and told me that if he were my dad, he'd never let me out of his sight again. Then he called what I'd done the act of coming with him the dumbest thing he'd ever seen a girl do. When we got back to the station, he asked me one more question. He asked if I used Snapchat or Instagram. I told him I did, but only a little bit. I tried to use this as an excuse to not give him my usernames. But instead of asking for them, all he did was say, "You shouldn't use those. They're bad for girls your age." I asked him if he used them. He said, "No, I like to stay off the grid." That was that. He left me at the top of the stairs of the subway, and as I walked down them, that was the last I ever saw of Brian. But looking back, I keep thinking about the layers of this. The way he actively ignored my age while on the train. The lies about his name. Taking me to a neighborhood with a bad reputation. That quote-unquote house party. If I hadn't decided to walk out when I did, or if the door had been locked, I think that things could have unfolded much differently. At best, this was reckless on my part. At worst, it was the edge of something that could have been really sinister. In the time since, I've learned that predators don't always grab you off the street. Sometimes they just keep talking until no feels harder to say than yes. They'll smile. They make it sound like an adventure, and by the time you realize how far you've gone, you're already somewhere you shouldn't be. I got lucky that night, but luck isn't a plan. If someone makes you uncomfortable, whether it's with words, questions, or where they're steering you, listen to that feeling. Because once you're in too deep, walking away isn't always as easy as it was for me. When I was about 19, I was all over dating apps. Tinder, OkCupid, you name it. I had pretty low self-esteem at the time, and honestly, I really just wanted to connect with someone. So when I got a message on OkCupid from this guy, let's call him Brent, I was open to it. Brent seemed great on paper. He liked a lot of the same things I did. Video games, some nerdy hobbies, even some of the same shows and books. He wasn't creepy or overbearing in his messages, and I figured, why not? We live in a pretty small city, so it wasn't weird that he looked vaguely familiar to me. I just assumed maybe I'd seen him around before. We set a date for Red Lobster. I know, kind of a funny choice, but as mainly broke college kids, it seemed like a nice restaurant. I don't even like seafood, but I wasn't going to be picky about it. When the day came, I made sure I looked nice, but not overdressed. Something casual yet put together. I got to the meeting spot expecting to see the guy from the photos. And sort of. But he looked different. Not in a bad angle kind of way, but in a hasn't showered, probably hasn't shaved in a week kind of way. His clothes looked like they'd just been pulled out of the laundry basket from the needs washing pile. I told myself not to be judgmental though. Maybe he had a rough day. I did my best to keep an open mind. We sat down, got our menus, the first basket of Cheddar Bay biscuits, and I decided that I'd order chicken. Like I said, I'm not into seafood. And that's when he made it weird. The server came over, I ordered, and Brent actually let out this loud, frustrated sigh in front of the server. Then he flat out told me he'd brought me to a seafood restaurant for a reason, and couldn't believe I'd order the chicken. I tried to laugh it off and explain I wasn't a fan of seafood, but he just kept going on and on about it. It was awkward, unnecessary, and I could feel people at the tables around us glancing over. After that, the mood was pretty much all but dead. We finished the meal, both obviously checked out on this date. I figured we'd say a quick goodbye in the parking lot and maybe a polite thanks before never seeing each other again. But that's not what happened. When we walked back to my car, he suddenly flipped the switch. Like that awkward dinner had not just happened. He kept leaning in close, brushing his arm against mine and trying to make small talk. Then came the attempts to kiss me. More than one. I dodged each time, laughing awkwardly, but he wasn't taking the hint. It turned into this long, drawn-out goodbye where I kept inching toward my car door, and he kept trying to find ways to keep me there. I finally managed to leave, but when I got home, my phone was blowing up. I braced myself for some snarky text about the chicken thing. Instead, it was much more intense. He sent me message after message about how perfect I was, how we were meant to be together, and how he couldn't wait for our next date. It threw me for an insane loop because we had been on one awkward dinner date, and he was already acting like he'd found the one. I didn't respond. I figured I'd talk to my roommate the next day and get her take on it. I didn't want to be cruel and just block him immediately, but I definitely wasn't interested. My roommate told me flat out, block him. I didn't listen. Huge mistake on my part. For the next few days, the texts didn't stop rolling in. He kept talking about how we were statistically perfect for each other, referencing some compatibility quiz from OkCupid. He said we were logistically ideal, and it was basically inevitable that we'd end up together. I tried politely telling him I wasn't interested, but he brushed it off like I was joking. He'd send things like, "You'll see someday," or "I'll help you understand." Then, one night, in the middle of one of these one-sided text conversations, he sends, "I'm outside." Before I could even make sense of it, there was a knock on my bedroom window. I froze. My heart was in my throat. I texted back asking what the hell he was doing, and he replied, completely casually by the way, that he worked for my apartment complex, doing maintenance and janitorial work. That's when it clicked for me. The reason that he looked familiar the first time I saw him was because I knew him from the apartment complex. He'd recognized me from the very beginning. This wasn't a situation where a bad date spiraled into a stalker. He had already been watching me. He admitted in his messages that he always knew we'd end up together. This is something he wasn't joking about. The guy was dead serious about it. I snapped. I sent this long, angry message telling him to leave me alone, threatening to involve the police, making it clear that I wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. His response? I was just being silly. I was stubborn. According to him, we were inevitable, and my refusal was like denying gravity. He was this bizarre mix of overly affectionate and completely condescending, as if my own feelings about my safety didn't matter because he'd already decided how things were meant to go. I blocked his number, but that only made things worse. Now, he wasn't just texting. He was showing up at my window more and more often. Tapping, knocking, sometimes full-on hitting it. I'd hear footsteps outside, but no knock, leading me to think that sometimes he would just stand out there. Eventually, I went to my landlord. I know I should have done it earlier, but at the time, I still had the mindset of, this isn't bad enough to involve other people. My landlord spoke to him, and thankfully, that slowed things down. Not long after, I moved from that complex, and that was the end to it. No more knocks, no more texts. It's been over 10 years now, but I still think about this sometimes. How younger me just wanted to brush this off as a weird date. How I purposefully ignored the signs. And how quickly someone from the apps turned into someone who knew where I slept. So Brent, my stalker date, I can only hope that we never run into each other ever again. Not at my door, not outside my window, not in the next decade, not in any lifetime. I live in a relatively big Australian city, but once you leave the center of it, it's pretty much all bushland and trees. When I was in year 3, around 7 or 8 years old for my folks in America, my school took the entire class on a trip to a campground about 45 minutes out of town. It was a one-night trip and we were all super excited to go. After a long day of archery, basketball, tennis, and all the other things that come on camping trips, we had dinner and went to bed. I distinctly remember laughing and messing around with all my friends before we fell asleep at around 11 p.m. Now, the next part of this, I had forgotten for years, until only recently it came back up in my mind. And now it's the clearest part of the memory. I used to be terrified of the dark, and I used to wake up multiple times a night because of it. This certain instance, I woke up in my cabin at around 2 a.m. I remember this because I had a watch that was very special to me, and for some reason, looking at it and checking the time comforted me in the dark. When I woke up, something felt strange. Not wrong necessarily, but off. I looked around my cabin and saw nothing of interest. But then I was struck with this intense urge to just look out the window. It was right next to my bed. Our room was on the second level of this cabin complex, so when you looked out the window, you had to look down to see the ground directly below you. When looking out the window, I saw nothing. And just when I started to look away, something flashed and caught my eye. I could have sworn I saw something right beneath the window, almost out of sight if you were simply looking forward. I looked down, and I saw a person. Now, this wasn't what I would call an average person. This looked more like a tweaker. Although as an 8-year-old, I'm not exactly sure I knew what that meant. He was tall, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", and his skin looked like he had just fallen hard on cement. This guy looked to be covered in scrapes or wounds, and his hair had been all buzzed off. He looked like he was about 40, but I think he may have been in his mid-20s based on his super skinny build. He wore this dirty black hoodie and black jeans that looked like motorbike pants. He also wore what looked like a mix between a fedora and a cowboy hat. Now, while I was looking down studying him, his eyes looked up and caught mine instantly. He was staring into the window. He didn't move his head there when he saw me. No, he had been actively staring into that window before I was even there. He had such a wide-eyed stare that I could have sworn he was straining all the muscles in his face to pop his eyes out as much as possible. The second we locked gazes, I ducked back down and hid under the covers. I wanted to scream and yell, tell my friends, but I was so scared that I couldn't even move. I waited under those covers for what felt like hours, until I finally felt like I was safe. I slowly peeked out from under the covers again and checked the window once more. He had moved a bit to the right, but he was still there, staring intently at my window. I didn't even get to become fully level with the window before I ducked out of sight again and went back to my hiding spot under the covers, whimpering. I'm not sure how, but I managed to fall back asleep. Once fully awake myself, I checked the window again, praying that this man was gone, and luckily he was. I told all my friends about it that morning, and they all laughed at me, thinking I had a nightmare. Although in their minds, the hilarious part was that I believed this nightmare. I forgot about all of this for about 10 years, but when it came back to me the other week, I realized that it couldn't have been a dream. Everything about it was so real. I have odd dreams on occasion, but those never actually make any sense. My dreams also flow pretty weirdly, so the absolute consistency is almost proof to me that this actually happened. Also, I specifically remember lying under my covers for ages, something that I doubt would happen in a dream. Same thing with looking at a watch. I have no idea who that was outside my window or what exactly he was doing. I just hope that he's not still out there doing that exact same thing, because that look in his eyes told me that whatever he was doing there, he wasn't messing around. I don't know exactly what I saw, but I just wish I had some sort of an answer. Let me start with the basics here. I'm a 26-year-old guy and I work alone in a small store that sells blinds. My shift is 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. It's actually a pretty uneventful job. Most days I'm just on my computer, handling the occasional customer, putting together quotes for the few people who come in. It's quiet, repetitive, and nothing strange ever really seems to happen. Well, that used to be the case. About a week ago, I noticed something odd going on across the street. In one of the windows of this 8-floor apartment building, someone had set up a telescope. That's not inherently odd, but it wasn't pointed at the sky. It was aimed directly at my desk. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, but the more I paid attention, the more obvious it became. Every time I glanced over at it, that telescope was pointed right at me. Now, I don't handle cash in the store. All of our transactions are on card, so I doubt that this is someone casing the place for a robbery. I don't have anything to prove that necessarily, but this just feels more personal. Well, one day, I decided to test my suspicion. I set my phone up to secretly record myself working for about an hour and a half. When I watched the footage back later, my stomach dropped. In the video, I could clearly see the telescope moving slightly whenever I moved away from my desk, as if the person on the other end of it was adjusting it to keep me in frame. When I stepped away to use the restroom, the telescope shifted. When I went to the coffee machine to freshen up my mug, it moved to find me again. I've never seen who's behind it, just that unsettling black tube aimed straight at me, tracking my movements for 10 hours a day. I don't know what to do about it, but it racks my nerves every time I think about it. Update 1. Big thank you to everyone who commented here. I didn't expect this much attention, but here's a little extra information that people have been asking for. The view into my store is through the open doorway, so lowering the blinds on our windows wouldn't help. After realizing this, I ended up moving my desk closer to a wall to get out of the telescope's line of sight. That's a change I only made after I'd gathered enough video evidence of what was happening. I also only became of this stalker last Tuesday. I have no idea how long this has been going on, but now I'm a bit extra careful when leaving work at night. Following some advice that some commenters left, I decided to speak with the property manager of the apartment building across the street. Let's call her Anna. and I wanted to show her the footage. I plan to do this today, so if anything happens over the weekend, I'll be happy to update again on Monday. Update 2. I showed Anna the videos, and she was shocked. Even more so when she actually looked across the street from my desk and saw the telescope with her own eyes. According to Anna, the apartment that it's coming from is rented by 2 young women, maybe in their early 20s. And in her own words, she described the 2 girls as odd. She said she rarely sees them leave the apartment. All of their meals and groceries are delivered through some app, and the only other regular visitor is a man who shows up every couple of nights and leaves early in the morning. This man is actually the one who signed the lease and pays the rent. When he moved the girls in about 2 months ago, he claimed that they were moving in to be closer to school. But Anna says she's never once seen them go to class or even leave the apartment during typical school hours. She agreed that it was strange and told me she'd bring it up with both the building owner and the man who signed the lease so that this would stop. I'm yet to hear anything further, but the moment I do, I'll be sure to let you guys know. Final update, I think. I've been off work the last couple of days, and I try not to think about it when I'm on my weekend. So when I came back to work Monday, I immediately noticed that something was different. The apartment window, which had always been open up until this point, was now shut, and that telescope was nowhere to be seen. I texted Anna to see if she'd heard anything. She told me that she, the building owner, and the man who rented the place had a brief conversation on Saturday. They called him to specifically address my concerns, but they presented it as the building having just learned that the girls were harassing businesses across the street. Thankfully, they didn't mention me directly. The man listened attentively while Anna spoke her piece. He seemed to take the warning seriously. But then something happened that turned the entire conversation on its ear. The building owner asked one simple question. By the way, what are the girls studying? Anna said that the man's attitude changed instantly. He told them to mind their own business before quickly figuring out a reason to end the call. Well, the very next day, Sunday, that man shows up bright and early in Anna's office to hand over the keys to the apartment. He didn't explain why. He didn't even explicitly say that the girls had left. He just handed her the keys and walked away. Anna says that she never saw the girls leave, but assumes that they must have gone early in the morning before she arrived at work. There was no damage to the apartment, nothing stolen. Anna also didn't hear any noise or commotion the night before. Now she's considering filing a police report, just because the whole situation feels strange. Personally, I think the only reason that those girls vanished so suddenly is because of that one question, asking what the girls were supposedly studying. And that's what makes this entire thing even more unsettling. It's like that guy didn't want anyone asking questions about those girls. If Anna does go to the police, I'll give my statement if it helps. But honestly, I'd be perfectly fine never finding out what was really going on in that apartment. Because as time goes on, I can't imagine it being anything good.